Welcome to our coverage of the chess competition of the Olympic Esports Series. Chess is one of the 9 esports chosen by the IOC for this inaugural event. We want to welcome those watching on Olympics.com/esports and of course those on the Chess.com channels on Twitch and on YouTube. I'm Grandmaster Robert Hess. Alongside me is my good friend Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky. Danya, happy to be joined with you for this inaugural event in the Olympic Esports Series. How cool is it that chess is a part of it? Yeah, well, 24,000 players jumped in for the qualifiers. Then we saw 21,000 players take part in the trials in mid-April. Now we are at the preliminary stage. 16 players will compete over the next 2 days, with 8 players from this competition advancing to Singapore from June 22nd to 26th. So Danya, just like any competition, the nature of the beast is that 16 players enter, but only 8 players will go through to Singapore. Yeah, we have whittled the field down, and we'll continue to whittle the field lower after this preliminary phase. We will be sending 8 players from this competition to Singapore. These are the first 8 of your contestants. Alexander Bortnick, well known to the Chess.com sphere. He wins many tournaments. Alexis Sarana, he's always a force to be reckoned with. But Danya, of the 8 players on this screen here, well, we see that Bassem Amin is a wild card entered into the competition. Alexander Shamanov, he was really good in the Champions Chess Tour event earlier this week. Sargsyan from Armenia, Jaime Santos Latasa from Spain, and Maxim Chigaev. They round out the top half of the player list. And, well, with the top 8, there must be another 8 players who are going to challenge them for these spots to Singapore in June. We have a Vietnamese number 2, Nguyen. He will be really a force in this competition as well. Samvel Sahakyan, another Armenian player. We have Alexander Rakhmanov, Pranesh Munirit Finama, Amin Ohanyan from Armenia, Aditya Mittal from India, Yali Sokolovsky, and Reed Samadov from Israel and Azerbaijan, respectively. Danya, we have some IMs in the competition. Which of the IMs do you think could find their way through to Singapore?
Mouth-watering field, and folks, I do realize I was muted there. Thank you for your patience. So just for the 3rd time, it is an honor to be doing this event, Robert, with you. Brand new, spiffy. It's amazing for chess to be mentioned in the same breath as all of these other sports. In terms of the field, you've got these IMs, you've got these GMs, but everybody in this field is incredibly experienced at Blitz. And I think that the experience playing in Title Tuesdays and grinding late-night Blitz sessions, that's what's going to really pay off, not necessarily someone's FIDE rating or even someone's title.
That's true, because these players are so close. This competition will be hotly contested. And, well, let's talk about this competition, about the preliminaries that we are about to start in just a couple of minutes, because in this field of 16 worthy competitors, the field will stay there after rounds 1 and 2. That's what we're going to see today. After round 3, 2 will advance to Singapore, 2 will be eliminated. That is the nature of the Elimination Swiss. 3 match wins and you make it through. 3 match losses and you stay home and don't get to go to the OES Finals. So after round 4, 3 go to Singapore, 3 are eliminated. And finally, last but certainly not least, we'll see 3, the final 3, advance to Singapore after round 5. While another 3 will remain home and not punch their ticket through. So Danya, I mean, it's going to be a grueling 5 matches for these players, but I really believe that everyone has a shot.
Indeed, absolutely everybody has a shot. And this has been the hallmark of a lot of the new online events that we've been commentating. It's no longer the case that there's 1 or 2 players who dominate the entire field, especially in this OES tournament. We'll look at the pairings, but you can make a case, Robert, for absolutely any of these players, any and all of these players, to make their way to Singapore. And that's what really makes this tournament so exciting to commentate. I really don't know what's going to happen.
Well, when we look at these mouth-watering matchups starting as early as round one, I think it's clear that we should not know what's going on because these players are quite evenly matched. We mentioned Bortnick. Alexander Bortnick, he has won Title Tuesdays. He's been at the top of many competitions. But when the Vietnamese number 2 is your opponent in the first matchup, you know it's not going to be easy sledding. Alexei Sarana, Sabelter, Sahakyan, they duke it out as well, as do Jose Martinez and Alexander Rakhmanov and Bassem Amin and Pranesh. So, Danya, of these matchups, which one excites you most?
Man, I'm looking from one to the other. My eyes are darting, but I'm going to have to go with my good friend Alexander Bortnick, who is facing the Vietnamese number 2, Nguyen. That's going to be a super interesting matchup. And of course, Alexei Sarana, the guy has been on a bender. He has been on a rampage in every online event from Title Tuesday to the Rapid Chess Championship. I'm curious to see if Alexei Sarana can continue his incredible performance in online chess as well.
And FIDE and the IOC selected Bassem Amin. Dr. Bassem, he is a licensed medical doctor from Egypt. He was placed in this field. He is nearly 2,700 super grandmaster strength. I'm excited for his matchup. But there are 4 more equally exciting matchups that we will have our attention on in round 1 of the action. We see that Shamanov takes on Ohanian. We have Sargsyan, another Armenian player, taking on Aditya Mittal. Jaime Santos from Spain takes on Sokolovsky from Israel. Chigaev, he is from Russia. He takes on Samarov from Azerbaijan. So 2 Russian players, 2 Armenian players in this half of the pairings. Danya, we talked about the IMs having a legitimate shot. At least we've been talking about it over the last few days. Which matchup do you think favors the IMs the most here?
Well, Riyad Samadov from Azerbaijan just got his international master title verified just a couple of days ago, Robert. And Yali Sokolovsky, not a household name to most people watching, but I've played my fair share of Blitz with him over the past couple of weeks. And I'm going to tell you, Jaime Santos Latasa, he's not looking at this as an easy matchup against an IM. This is going to be a really difficult trial for the Spanish Grandmaster. I think Yali Sokolovsky's Blitz experience might allow him to score that upset against one of the top Spanish young players.
And for those who are newer to chess and may not be aware of the rating and title system, Grandmaster is the highest title in chess. International Master is second highest. So there are players who don't have the highest title yet. They may be young. They're gaining that experience, but they can still defeat these higher rated players, these Grandmasters, in 4-game matches. And well, that's what we're going to have in front of us for the preliminary stages. The format, it's a blitz time control. That's very quick chess that we will see of 3 minutes and 2 seconds added per move, which means that if you are in time trouble, if you're down to 5 seconds, every single move you make, if you're making them quickly, can gain you up to 2 seconds back, and you can build up your clock. In a best of 4-game match, 2.5 points wins. It's 1 point for a win, half a point for a draw. And if we get to tie breaks, if it's 2-2, when all is said and done, we get Armageddon, where the players will bid for their time. If we get there, probably when we get there, it will be super exciting stuff for us as commentators and for you as spectators. But Danya, for the players, this is getting stressful.
I say this every time. What's stressful and miserable for the players is the creme de la creme for the commentators. This is what we live to see. The Armageddon, the stress, the time scrambles. Now there's going to be time scrambles that are measured because of the 2-second increment, Robert, but 3+2, that is the standard World Blitz Championship time control. And I really think it strikes a balance between offering us a lot of entertainment without getting overly crazy.
Yeah, there will be mistakes, but there will also be brilliant moves. And that's the nature of blitz chess, is with quicker time, you have to make quicker decisions. That's when mistakes are more likely to occur. But we did just see the World Championship come down to rapid chess. That is a little bit more time, but in the final seconds, the final minutes there, that's when Ding Liren was able to pull away from his very worthy opponent in Jan Nepomniachtchi. So these players are very strong in their own right. They will have to be quick, Danya. The decisions will have to be made very fast. And we'll see who gets the best of their opponent in this round 1.
We will indeed. And Alexander Bortnick, he is a household name by now, Robert, across the board. Everybody knows about Bortnick. Everybody knows about Alexei Sarana. It's just incredible how in the last couple of years, grandmasters who otherwise didn't have all that many opportunities to play super tournaments, these are not 2700s, have nonetheless made a name for themselves as the beasts of online chess. I'm curious to see if that's going to carry over to today, because Bortnick, he's got a very difficult trial ahead of him.
Yeah, and ratings in chess are based on historical performance. You may play like a 2700 on average, but today you might play like a 2300. And the next day, you play like a 3100 supercomputer. So we will see which Bortnick shows up today. And we know when he's at his best, he can duke it out with the best players in the world, including the Hikaru Nakamuras and the Magnus Carlsens. But Bortnick, he is a tough first-round pairing. He plays Nguyen from Vietnam. We know Lam Lei, who's a former World Blitz champion, the #1 player from Vietnam. But the #2 in the country is no slouch, is a superstar in his own right, and he would like to get off on the right foot as he wants to punch his ticket to Singapore.
And he's been grinding. I've noticed him last couple of nights on Chess.com playing various time controls, 1+0, 3+0, 3+2. I've seen him play for hours, and that's a great sign. That means he's taking this particular tournament and this particular match seriously. You want to get in already warmed up. That's the downside of these types of events. Not really a downside, but you don't have time to warm up. You can't do 30, 45 minutes of Puzzle Rush. Every game matters from the very beginning. So you already want to come in feeling like you're warmed up, and you cannot afford to just start blundering in the first couple of games, because before you know it, you're going to be knocked out.
It's true. And unlike a big Swiss where there'd be hundreds of players, so if you lose your first matchup, then you play someone a little bit lower rated. There are no low rated opponents in this field. Everyone earned their spot here. 14 players had to go through the trial phase, and then 2 players were selected as wildcards. And those players, Bassem Amin and Jose Martinez, better known as Jaspam to the online community, they're very deserving of this spot here in the preliminaries. So I'm excited for the matches to get underway. I think the players, they're excited as well, because the stress settles in before the games start. But when the clock starts ticking, when the first moves are underway, Danya, they become chess players and they forget about the rest of the world.
They absolutely do. We saw this exact kind of effect in the World Championship match that we had a couple of decades ago between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Ding Liren. Do you remember that match, Robert? I know you were very little when that was happening. My parents allowed me to watch it on the television, which was a new invention back then. But in that match, we saw the nerves, right, of Jan Nepomniachtchi as he spins around in his swivel chair. And then once the handshake occurs and the first move is made, of course, the players are still mighty nervous, but a lot less so than that anticipation before the game. So these players, they can't wait for these games to take off. When you've got a 3+2 game, you just can't afford to expend any amount of energy on worrying about how nervous you are. And on that note, I think the games have begun.
Well, let's pull up those games as the games start, because the action happens very quickly. You blink for a second, the game could even be over. Some people will blunder pieces, others will find brilliant tactics. And Danya, at the start of this game, it looks quite normal, quite peaceful for now. We've only seen 1 pawns traded on the E file, which means it's an open file for the rooks, and white will probably get there first.
Yeah, this is a pawn structure which arises out of several different openings. This particular one was a Petrov, so Nguyen clearly showing a desire to play it solid in the first game. He obviously would not mind a draw. But just because the structure is symmetrical doesn't mean that the game is going to end peacefully. Remember, in 3-minute games, something is very likely to happen. Something's going to explode. Something's going to give. And Alexander Bortnick, he hates draws. He will always try to find a way to unbalance the game. And he can do that, Robert, in several ways. You could put the knight on e5. You could drive the bishop over to h6. I think white is a little bit preferable here.
Yeah, because you've jumped your knight out into the center. The bad news for white is you look at the queen side, the rook in the corner, the knight, and the bishop. Those are all undeveloped pieces. And so the good news for that bishop on c1 is it may dart all the way out to h6, putting pressure in front of the black king. He stops on f4. I think he didn't want to change the pawn structure. He'll take back with the bishop on e5. And for Bortnick, his next moves are quite natural. He'll bring his knight from b1 out to d2. He'll slide a rook to the open e file, and he just wants to take control of the open lane. There's only one of them, and it's the e-file.
Yeah, and here comes the rook to e1. And it's very important to ask yourself in a 3+2 game, whose position is easier to play? It's much less about objective advantages and more about, okay, who can make 5 or 6 moves that are relatively risk-free and can easily improve the position. And here it's definitely Bortnick. With that being said, Robert, with the structure being as symmetrical as it is, if black can get that knight off of e5, and he just did, and maybe trade one more pair of minor pieces, maybe drop the other knight back to d7, and redeploy the dark-squared bishop to g7, this game could just fizzle out in a matter of a couple of moves.
Yeah, though, the key is the time control, right? In a classical game of chess, when you have an hour plus on your clock, we expect this game to be equal. There is a symmetrical pawn structure, as you were saying, and the pieces are all safely protected for both sides. But this is an interesting move. He doesn't retreat his bishop, he protects, he reinforces it with his knight. And those kind of imbalances could be very important as we see the players dip low on the clock.
Yeah. And bishop f8 has been played. White starts attacking with h4. This is typical Alexander Bortnick. Unfortunately, his minor pieces haven't come along for the ride because they're now on the side of the board. And I don't know about h4. I mean, this could easily backfire. He's obviously trying to drive that pawn up to h5, create some sort of preconditions for a kingside attack. And finally, we're going to get some sort of minor piece imbalance. Who do you think it favors, knight versus bishop?
I think it favors the white side here because you look and you cut the board in half from the E through the H file. You know I love to do this, Danya. We've commentated for so many years together. White has an extra pawn on the king side where both players' kings are. That I think that gives him more of an initiative. You see him throwing that pawn up to H5, and he's already trying to crack black's defenses. If you take on G6 and throw your pawn up to E6, and that's why that rook planted there, but that was a very dangerous idea that Nguyen just stopped.
Yeah, rook e6, kind of putting that rook laying down the wood on the king side. And this pawn on e5, classic example of something being both a strength and a weakness at the same time. It's obviously occupying a lot of space. It's grabbing important squares on the king side. At the same time, if black starts doubling and maybe even tripling up on the e file, that pawn might very well become a weakness as we move closer to the endgame.
It's true, because white is going to try to defend it with the next rook. Black will attack it with his other rook. There is all eyes on the e5 pawn. All of our attention is there. And I think for Bortnick, he needs to bring his queen into the game. The queen on c2 is not playing a major role. I think if the black rook goes to e8, he'll have queen a4, Danya, hit the a7 pawn, and bring the queen over to square like f4, somewhere towards the king side.
Yeah. Queen a4, queen f4, maybe h6 at some later point in a timely fashion. And here we go again, right? The battle revolving around the c5 pawn. If Bortnick loses that pawn, he's going to go pawn down in the queen endgame. That's the last thing you want. So maybe queen a4, maybe this is the time. And then black actually is the one who has a choice. He can take on e5 and basically bail out, or he can try to defend that a pawn. But that seems very concerning. The last thing you want with the black is to give white the chance to get the queen over to the king side. But Sasha, with c4, and what if black just takes on c4 and takes on e5, Robert?
Yeah,
what does he have in mind?
It was given a question mark. It was a mistake here, everybody. The bishop that captures the pawn e5 will protect the queen on c7, and that's of crucial importance. Because right now, if white had a turn, you would take this pawn on d5. That was the point of c4. But after c takes d5 black, its queen is not defended on c7, but a bishop taking a pawn center will, in fact, defend that queen.
Yeah, and Nguyen clearly surprised by that move. Both sides imperceptibly have dropped down below a minute. Black has 30 seconds, and yes, a 2-second increment. That's a lot, but those 2 seconds evaporate instantly, and he played d4. He didn't take the pawn. Okay,
so isn't that a hanging pawn? If white takes it with the knight,
it is.
Black will then go take on e5. So I understand kind of the purpose behind it, but it was a mistake.
Ooh, queen b6. He missed queen b6 at the end with a fork on the 2 pawns, and Sasha with a really, really sloppy sequence of moves. He's going to lose a pawn. He's probably lost in the endgame here, but he does have some counterplay, Robert, with a queen and the knight. We know how dangerous that tandem can be.
Yes, because the bishop is limited to its own color complex, the dark squares. The queen and the knight will team up on the light squares. Look at that f7 pawn. That's a potential target. You have to be really careful. In fact, queen takes b2 could already be a mistake in some positions because the queen e8 check and knight e5 to follow. You may not have a good way of defending the pawn. So it's bishop h6. He wants to take on e3, Danya, with the queen and force them off. But this looks scary for the black king.
And it looks like white has some sort of perpetual. Now knight g5 check was possible. He just brings his king up to f2 and says, hey, I've got everything defended. Knight g5 is checkmate.
Oh my gosh, double question mark. That is a huge blunder because
knight
the
takes
king
f7.
goes up. Yeah, knight 7, and there's going to be all sorts of ideas against that king. There's queen h2 check, as you're pointing out. Oh no, this is something that black is going to pay the price
where's the mate?
for.
I think the mate is queen h2, queen f4, g4, g5, and king f3 in the end.
Yes,
I think I
was
see
thinking
the
same
mate.
thing. But I don't even think you need to checkmate the black king to win this game. Like, if you played with like queen f4 here, I'm guessing you're still winning because you're threatening queen f4 mate, and the white king will escape the checks, and black's king will not.
He's
But he
seen
finds
it.
it.
He's seen it. G5.
Oh
and
my
king
goodness.
f3. Look at this mating construction. King f3 with unstoppable checkmate on g4. The only thing black can do is give up the queen, and Sasha Bortnick turns it around. What a final position, Robert. Incredible. Look at
And
this.
these players are brilliant blitz specialists. Queen G4 is checkmate coming from Bortnick. Black is up a bishop, but the king is going to be checkmated. There's no way to stop it, and Bortnick takes game 1.
Incredible game. It wasn't always clean. It wasn't always careful. But at the end of the day, Bortnick's experience in time scrambles pays off, and he wins the first game. He strikes first. What an incredible mating construction.
Beautiful finish to this game, and that allows Bortnick to take the first game. Let's go to another if we can, and we see that, well, we have an endgame here. Black is up a knight, but that passed a pawn keeps the knight tied down.
It does. So this is anybody's game. White is only a pawn for the minor piece, but look at those two passers on either side of the board. Okay, I think Black is not risking here. If he can go king f4, obviously he has to make sure that you don't let this pawn slip through. White is threatening bishop g8. And now bishop f5 is coming. Oh my gosh.
White's
Bishop
winning
f5.
this game. How is this not? It's winning. I think the engine has not reacted unless there's some way to stop it. But no, there it goes. The engine finally reacts, and you cannot stop the runner. The h-pawn is sprinting to the other side, becoming a queen.
h7. Black is not nearly fast enough. He can try c3. That ain't going to help. White can even afford to just take back on f5.
Yeah, and even if Black had already queen, that check on h6 would have stopped the pawn anyway, and we see a win for Jaime Santos Latasa.
Yeah, what an incredible end to that game. I jinxed him, of course. The moment I said Black is not risking, that is exactly the moment that he blundered. Past pawns in time pressure is the biggest kryptonite for all of these players. No matter how good you are, when you're dealing with these two passers, you just lose your mind so often.
Okay, so we see Jaime Santos Latasa and Alexander Bortnick. They won their first games of the match. We're getting word that some players, they have not joined their games. They've not joined their matches, and that may result in a forfeit for those. We will update you as we get further word on those matches, but it seems that some of the players are off to blazing hot starts. Some great chess that we've just seen. So, Danya, let's go to another game if we can. It seems like the next ones will be getting underway.
And let's go back to Bortnick's game. Let's reward him for that incredible mate that he found at the end of game 1. This changes his strategy. He's up 1-0. He now has the ability to play solidly with the black pieces, and that's exactly what he's doing. He can play a lot of different openings. White started the game with 1b3, Robert, so a Nimzovich-Larsen opening, and yet it doesn't seem like White's gotten the kind of position that you want to get out of 1b3.
No, White has one triumph in the position. That bishop on b2 is better than its counterpart on e7. The bishop on h7. Black's bishops are limited by the pawn structure. And I think that White is just trying to take over the c-file. That makes sense to me, Danya. But Black has no real weaknesses in the position, nothing to exploit. So if you give up the c-file completely, then maybe you're in a bit of trouble. But if you can contend on the c-file, then Black should be doing just fine. And that's a really nice move, rook c7.
Rook c7, just fighting for control over the c-file. And the other idea is after rook takes c7, the knight recaptures on c7 and reinforces the pawn on b5. This is one way that Black can mess this position up. If White eventually gets a knight into c6, I've seen Hikaru win a lot of games like that, and then you go bishop d4. You know, these pawns, they grab a lot of space, but they're also simultaneously weaknesses. So Bortnick is trying to make sure that that doesn't happen by slicing off the contact between White's queen and the c6 square.
And Black has a big threat. Look at the queen and bishop. They're lined up against the knight to win that piece. But behind is the f2 pawn. Is e5 possible for Black?
Knight takes c5, I think might have worked out tactically there for White because c7 would have hung in the end.
As you like to say, LPDO. Loose pieces drop off, and the knight on c7 was threatened in that variation. So good eye by you, good eye by Bortnick, not blundering like I would have, and instead brings his knight back to d7, reinforcing his bishop on c5. It looks like all of Black's pieces are working pretty well together. White's are doing the same, so now it's going to be a side of who can outmaneuver the other.
Yeah, and White is investing a lot of time here trying to figure out the optimal setup. He's played e3, and what on earth was that? That is just unacceptable. You can't blunder like this, but was that a blunder or was that a devious trap? I think it was a blunder, Robert, but I think he might have just gotten lucky with queen c3.
Uh-oh, and we're trying to line up the queen and the bishop. That's a battery.
Oh my gosh.
And that is lined up towards g7. So the bishop on d3 is under attack directly by the queen, and the queen threatens all the way down to g7 with checkmate. If you could pick that knight up from d4 and throw it off the board, the queen lands in front of the black king with check and mate. So Danya, he might have lured him into a trap.
Yeah, I honestly, just by the facial expressions, I feel like White blundered that pawn, but rather than collapsing and starting to tilt, he sat himself down and said, let me find the best resource. Queen c3 comes to mind. Now you have to decide where you move this knight. Knight takes b5 would win the pawn back, but it doesn't create any additional threats. Black can simply respond with f6. Knight f5 is a more ambitious move, but still, Black can play f6, and you run the risk of not garnering any compensation for the pawn. You know what you don't want to do is knight takes c6, because then Black recaptures with the knight, and then you're down a piece, and you still don't have mate on g7.
That's really instructive, because many people would play the most forward-looking move, but the black knight takes back and protects the mating threat, so white would have just lost a piece. So knight takes b5, thank you for the pawn, and I think black has to drop that pony back to e8. Look at that, a brilliancy, giving up a knight in two different ways, because the queen and bishop stare in the other direction towards the black king. I really think that was a nice find by Nguyen after he might have blundered the pawn. Let's call it a sacrifice, but knight e8 is a very good defensive move from Bortnick. So Danya, both players, well, Nguyen is down under a minute, Bortnick at 105. This is going to be a time scramble. Who do you think has the upper hand when they get down to those remaining seconds?
Well, there's no question that Bortnick has the upper hand in a flat-out time scramble. He's more experienced. He's played more Title Tuesdays. And all of that experience starts coming in handy when both sides are under 30 seconds. With that said, Robert, I think White's position is easier to play. And the reason is that Black is saddled with a weakness on a5. White's got a strong outpost on b5, and easier play because he's got more space, and Black simply has more weaknesses to attend to. But Bortnick could try to turn things around if he wants to play ambitiously with an eventual e5.
It's a good point. Black can strike in the center, and then it becomes anyone's game. And when you push pawns forward, they do not move backwards. They could create weaknesses in your position. For example, now if e5 is played, we see a knight jumping into f5. Look out for the light squares. He plays it anyway. He has no fear. Maybe queen f5 is also available right now.
Oh, but that has to be calculated, and he's burning very important time. He's definitely thinking about it. You can sense the wheels turning. Queen f5, I love that move. It counterattacks the knight on d7. Drops the knight back to f3, a little bit passive, and Bortnick's got to be breathing a sigh of relief here.
And you saw when he shook his head, he did not even like his own move, but he wants knight h4. And if he gets knight h4, watch out for the g6 square.
But Black does have knight f8 to guard it. 20 seconds. 18 seconds.
He's got to find an idea. I don't see many ideas.
15 seconds.
Done it. He has to go for the light squares, and he does it, but knight f8's a quick response from Bortnick.
And then White could take on d6 and stick the knight on f5. And obviously, White doesn't have any weaknesses. White can chill. The problem is, if he gets upset that he hasn't been able to create the chances he wanted to create on the king side, it's easy to get discombobulated and allow some sort of d4 breakthrough. Bortnick now down to 15 seconds as he figures out a way to protect these incredibly weak light squares on the king side. And he's down to 10 seconds. e4.
Whoa. But that's a committal move. Yeah, stop it. Not again.
No.
But we see the reason why it's so committal is the bishop on b2 has a new lease on that diagonal. The d5 pawn is a backward pawn stuck in place, and it's going to be targeted. And queen g4, f5, we might see a knight sacrifice on f5 down there. The black king is going to be in harm's way.
But then the black king can run over to the queen side, and that's a very dangerous idea. With 1 second, Bortnick plays f5, and White's investing the rest of his time to figure out whether to sacrifice, and he does. I don't like that decision, though, in a blitz context. Let's see where Bortnick runs.
Yeah, he's going to run d8 to c7. But look at the past pawns. G4,
1 second.
g5. Oh, he barely got the move. 0.7 seconds.
G4, g5. You're absolutely right. I didn't see that. And Bortnick has no time to react to it. Knight f8 I would play.
He tries to trade pieces. He's trying to get some of the attackers off the board. And look at the clock management from Nguyen here. He's up over 11 seconds. Here comes the pass pawn.
And what a defensive construction by Bortnick. Knight f8 is an amazing move. That's clutch. He's stopping the g-pawn from progressing further. And I think he's gaining the upper hand after queen e6.
Great find by you. Great find by Bortnick. Queen f4, knight g6. All the black's pieces are coming into play here. And the the king side is collapsing for white.
All of the buttons are being pressed and all of the chambers are filled. The king can move back to g8 where it's the safest it's been all game. And the knight's coming out to e6. White's losing control of the game.
But the a5 pawn does drop here. That seemed like a mistake from Bortnick to give up the queenside pawn. Now we have two unopposed passers for white, and black's minor pieces will have to run on over to the queenside.
He got excited by the prospect of a queen trade. I think he might have just forgotten that a5 was hanging. He could lose this if he's not careful, but he's going to win a pawn on. No, he's not. He couldn't take on b3 there because the a-pawn would have promoted, and here comes the b-pawn, but he's not fast enough.
But the king, the pawns are on light squares between the white king because of the g4, f5, e6, and we'll snap up those pawns.
And it's going to be a draw. I think the likeliest outcome is a draw. White could absolutely win this if black lets the pawns through. Bortnick has to go around and take those a-pawns now.
Yeah. And bishop h4, we're going to see all the pawns come off the board. White takes on d5 and e4 after black takes on f2 and e3. And without any more material remaining, even if black gave away the bishop for free, like we just see, it's a draw.
Wow, what an incredible game. And without any delay, we go to our other game, which is still ongoing. Yali Sokolovsky is a point behind against Santos Latasa, but has excellent winning chances in this rook endgame. Let's see if he can level the score. With 2 seconds left, the Israeli youngster with b4. What do you make of this rook endgame?
It's even material, but it's not an even position. White's pawns go first. And the c4 pawn isn't even relevant right here. White should play king a4, pawn to b5, get that pawn to the other side as quickly as possible.
By the way, Pranesh, that's Artun. He has defeated Bassem Amin 2.5 half. The match is over. He just crushed Bassem Amin. But we're going to focus on this game because White's got the far advanced passer, but it's fully contained by Black's rook. b7, there's rook b2. And here comes the f-pawn. But b7... rook a2 check.
Oh, rook a2. The king can go to b5, and then rook b2 check if you try to go that way.
f3, it's close.
Yeah, white stops it just in time. Rook takes pawn on c4, then f2, rook f4, and the rooks will sacrifice for the other person's pawns. But I mean,
rook f4 check. What was that?
The pawn.
Oh my god, he just had to push f2. And now it's a Lucena position.
It's completely winning for white. You build a bridge.
Unbelievable. Just a mental collapse there by Santos, who's going to allow Yali Sokolovsky to tie the match. King b5 and rook b4. Perfectly executed bridge. And he resigns.
And I just want to mention for Yali Sokolovsky, he's an international master. He's one of those players we said could land an upset. And by the way, Reid Samadov was a no-show against Maxim Chigaev. So Chigaev gets the match win.
He does indeed. We also have a couple of other updates. Alexei Sarana is leading 2-0 against Samvelter Sahakyan from Armenia. Shall we have a look at their third game as Alexei Sarana tries to put this match away?
Let's go. That's a great matchup to look at because Alexei Sarana, that's a name you do not want to forget. He's been in most of the biggest events online in recent years. He's also the reigning European chess champion over the board in classical chess, the longest time controls. So he's proven he can do it in every time control, no matter the format.
Indeed. And right now he is playing a King's Indian. He's got the luxury of the white pieces here, the luxury of being able to make a draw. Samvelter Sahakyan has to win 3 games in a row in order to stay in this match. So we have a very standard King's Indian position. The knight coming out to c5. Typically, you see white playing f3, but white can also protect this pawn with queen c2.
Right. And I think, Danya, as a King's Indian player, the one thing you'd be a little bit upset about is the black rook being on e8. It should be on f8 because black wants to strike with f5.
And because the center is closed, I would actually consider investing a tempo and shifting the rook back to f8. Of course, white's idea is generally to play a3, b4 and begin the queenside expansion. It looks to me, Robert, like white is a little bit faster in this particular version. As much as I love the King's Indian, I feel like Samvel has mishandled this once again.
Yeah, the knight on c5, it's being stared at by multiple white pieces, but white doesn't really want to take the knight because black will take with the b6 pawn. And if that happens, the idea that you're showing with arrows will not occur. So that is why white is refraining from taking this knight on c5. We talk about double pawns not being the best. Here, those double pawns would be great because inherent to having double pawns are open files, and the b file would be open for black.
Whoa, he takes on c5 with the bishop, which is the least likely, I would imagine, giving up the control of the key dark squares on the king side. He has a very concrete idea. I think he wants to play f4 in response to gf, but Samvel takes with the bishop, which I'm also not sure about, by the way. I thought he should have thought about g takes f5.
And here, g4 is a pawn sacrifice that I'm thinking about, Danya, and he plays it. Bishop takes knight. Oh, he takes back with the bishop. I did not like that. No, that was a bad choice there by Sarana.
Because now the knight is a monster. He should have.
Look at this position. If we just try to be instructive and talk about the overarching features, the bishop on g7 is locked in behind its own pawn. So what you really want to do is get rid of that knight on f4 for your light square bishop, which is not going to happen, and then bring your own knight to e4. So maybe Sarana, needing a draw, is thinking, okay, with opposite colored bishops, I'll be able to handle that. But black's on the attack.
Black is absolutely on the attack, and the moment this bishop moves away from e4, black is going to shove a pawn down to e4 and open up the diagonal for the bishop. Also, on the queen side, black is fully containing any progress white could have with his pawns. You could throw in rook b8 and probe for weaknesses. Samvel is in charge, but he has to cash this into a win. A draw wins the match for Alexei.
Yeah, and how do you win this position? Look at this. White is playing checkers on one board, and black is playing checkers on another. White has all these pieces on light squares, black has all these pieces on dark squares. So you're going to have some tension. You might have to sacrifice. You may have to take some objectively dubious decisions because you need to risk it to get the biscuit. And right now, Sahakyan, Sahakyan, he cannot afford a draw.
You cannot. And I would just try to keep the tension for as long as possible. The issue is you don't have as long as possible because white's about to play h4, and Alexei is not just going to sleepwalk his way and allow black to attack on the king side. The problem with h4 might be knight takes c4, knight takes c4, queen takes h4. And so he takes a more modest approach. He plays h3, and he's just kind of chilling. He's just saying, hey, what do you got? How are you going to infiltrate? And I don't think he is.
It's a good question. In fact, white could take the upper hand if black's not careful. And he just goes back and forth. And h4, as you mentioned, is an idea. But I like how black is playing on the queen side. Maybe the queen should go up and the rook should go from f8 to b8 or double on the a file because at some point the a file will open up.
It will, and it opens up right now. A-B is likely. Alexei pausing a
blunder.
Bit.
There's no rook f2. You drop the h3 pawn.
Oh, he has to cover with the knight, but that strains his position to the maximum. Rook takes f3 already has to be considered. There's tactics galore on both sides of the board. I would consider a move like queen f6 just to accentuate the tension a little bit. Ooh,
yeah,
he drops his knight back.
He wants queen h4, bishop h6, try to use those dark squares, and his second rook is going to go to a8. So he is going to reinforce that rook on a2. Done it. This pin is nasty on the second rank.
It is, which is why I would trade on a2, play rook f2, and try to move the knight away. If you can trade the other pair of rooks, you're not out of the woods because the dark squares are still massively weak on the king side. You could still get checkmated even without the rooks, but you come one step closer towards solving the problems. But how are you going to move the knight away? You can't because you're going to lose the h3 pawn at the end of the line.
And that's not just a one-point piece. That's actually a key to saving the white king. So knight g3 would drop the pawn. Knight g1, impossible because the queen and rook will attack the f2 rook. And knight g5 is a huge threat. So Danya, I feel like at this point, we're already looking at a position where black is thinking about going for checkmate.
Oh, absolutely. Knight g5 is now a massive threat. You would even calculate it while sacrificing the rook. Of course, that's not necessary. And I would consider here the move bishop h6. Alexei, I think, wants to drop the rook back to f1 and smoke the queen out of h4 because a queen trade is obviously in white's favor, even though it should be pointed out, Robert, that black is still much better, even in the endgame.
Yes, indeed. And knight g1 trying to trade up piece. I like the defense from Sarana. We see the eval bar dipping. Everybody on the left-hand side of your screen, if you're newer to chess, that's the evaluation bar. Engines are better than human players, and it's showing you the objective evaluation that black is much better in this position because he's on the attack. He is going after the white king. He's more active, but that is a great move down at protecting all of the pawns.
And Alexei is contorting himself this way and that way, hither and thither he goes, defending h3. Those opposite-colored bishops can really, really hurt black's winning chances if white forces an exchange of heavy pieces, which seems more and more likely. Also, look at the clock, 45 seconds for Sahakyan. You would think that Alexei was the one attacking. He's been the one defending, and yet he's built up almost a minute extra on the clock. This ain't looking good for black.
Yeah, when you need to win a game and the winning chances aren't so clear, you're no, trading rooks.
No,
that's not going to help.
Wrong direction. Queen a2.
Although done it, there is going to be some knight g5 stuff at the right moment. Bishop e3 if the queen moves away. So I get it. It's the wrong step, but it may lead to a better outcome.
The game is definitely not over, and Alexei has to decide, do I want to reposition my queen on a2 and allow knight g5? He decides it. The eval bar doesn't agree with him. Eval bar doesn't agree with anything right now.
I thought bishop e3 was a good starting point for black. You need to get after that knight on g1, and the knight doesn't really have an easy place to go to. So king g7, just a waiting move, and done it. It was almost a minute lead on the clock, but Samvel has done really well in terms of keeping his time where it's been, and it's Alexei who's had to think.
And it seems like knight e4 and queen f6 threatens to infiltrate to f2. Right now, he's biding his time, queen e7 by Samvel, and white brings the queen back. But it seems like white is very, very close to stabilizing. Queen d3. And if black doesn't find a way to infiltrate on the dark squares on the king side, well, how are you going to win this game? Right now, knight takes c4 and queen f2 is a huge threat. But Alexei is just in time to move his knight to g3.
Yeah, don't take the bishop on d4. You may be getting rid of one of black's most impressive pieces, but then black will have a most impressive pawn, a pass pawn connected in the center. So I would not be taking the bishop. But Danya, look at the clock. Samvel, he is under 30 seconds, but Alexei's about to join him.
I wonder what gave Alexei pause. There was knight g3. He plays a different type of solidifying move, queen to d3. How is black going to keep tightening the screws? We've seen that move so many times. Knight g5 to f7, making space for the queen, and then the knight is going to come back around to g5. This is getting worse for white. He might have
Yeah.
to take the bishop.
Oh no, but that is not going to be good news for white. He may get some play against the black king now because it's 3 pawns against 2. Let's push him off the board. But that is a passed pawn on d4 for black. And I love it. Carving out the dark squares. g5 was a phenomenal choice.
Fantastic positional play and time pressure. This poses another very serious problem to white. Alexi's time advantage has evaporated. This is looking really, really grim for white. He has to try to lock the position up and prevent black from infiltrating, but h5 is going to cause even further strain on white's position.
Yes, this is a problem for white. A pawn is already threatened on g4. The black king will go f6 and e5 and take those dark squares in an endgame without queens. Alexi down under 7 seconds now. He's got to find a move, but it's not an easy choice.
And he drops the bishop back to f3, but now after h takes g4, knight e5 will come with great effect, and black can really solidify things with king f6. Alexi hanging by a thread. Is he losing in the pawn endgame? I don't know.
Oh, but that was a mistake? And no, the reason why he's hanging in there, Don, is the f5 pawn. That's a passer, so black cannot bring both king and knight into the game. You need to stop the pawn. I like what black's doing, though. This is a good setup.
You have to figure out where to bring the knight. He wants to bring it to b4, but even if he does that, pushing d3 might actually be very risky. You might end up losing that pawn. I don't think black has a win here.
No. Maybe c6, just try to trade off a pair of pawns.
Okay.
Yeah,
white takes it, goes bishop e4, and then what?
And then you go back to b4. At some point, you have to play d5 if the bishop goes away. Ooh, okay.
Gotta
Where's that
try
knight
it.
going?
Back to c6 it goes, gaining a little bit of time. Perhaps back to f6 and then d5.
D5 right now. But he's waiting. But the problem is, for Sahakyan, there's increment. So Sarana's not going to dip into time trouble. He's too fast.
He has 20 seconds. He's got enough time to react to something unexpected, which makes things even more grim for black. Although, eval bar now dips. Maybe the king can go all the way around to a5 and b4.
That is brilliant, and it shows the power of a knight. The knight on f6 blockades white's pass pawn and stares over it to the g4 pawn. So white's king is stuck in place. The black king will just run around. Here it goes. King b6, king a5, king b4.
There ain't a single thing that Alexei Sarana can do because his king is just not able to reach c4 in time. He's got 2 seconds. He's going to lose. King a5, king b4. And you can take that pawn on g4. Last-ditch attempt by white to generate counterplay using this f-pawn. Great stuff by Alexei. He's exhausting every last chance. That's what he always does.
And Sahakyan using his time now under 10 seconds. He takes that pawn. He needs to bring his knight back maybe to h6 and then push the g pawn. But that white king is going to be a nuisance for the...
Oh! What a move! Trousers!
Oh my goodness! He gives up a knight, but his pawns will be too fast.
And he can play g3 anyway, and then d3 to deflect the bishop, and g2 will promote. Alexei can resign. He can't stop everything at once. He's got to double back with his king, and I think king c3 might be winning here, but it's not totally easy. Wait a second, not over yet.
Knight h5 check as well. I thought he was going knight h5 to save his pawn, but yeah, he's just pushing his passers. c3?
Okay, bishop d3, c2,
C2.
and it wins. He squeezes it through.
Yeah, this is... Look how close this is, by the way.
One tempo.
One tempo away from being a draw. If that pawn were on f7, everybody, then it would be a draw. This is winning for black, and that means Sahakyan stays in the match.
Wow, what an incredible on-demand victory, but that is just one of so many games that he's going to have to win. He is still behind with a score of 1-2. Alexei still only needs a draw in the next game to secure qualification.
And we have some players winning their first match. Bortnick did, in fact, win against Nguyen. We had Sargsyan winning his match, and the Russian duo of Maxim Chigaev and Alexander Rakhmonov, they go to 1 win and 0 losses in terms of their match results. 3 wins, and you get to go to Singapore. 3 losses, and you're gone. That is the nature of this Elimination Swiss. So some players off to a good start. And Donna, in this game, Yali Sokolovsky, I would say that it's a decent start for him with the white pieces, but nothing spectacular.
He lost the previous game, so he is down with a score of 2-1. He has to win this game. He has to win this game to force Armageddon. That'll be, I think, our first Armageddon of the day if he can score this on-demand victory. But it's looking pretty solid for black so far, although with that open F-file, Robert, there's a lot of tactical potential on the king side.
Yeah, this pawn e3 is loose, but the open f-file, as you're saying, maybe rook f3. Let's get a rook lift there and bring it to g3. Let's go for the attack. The bishop on c2. It's just waiting back there to help deliver a checkmate, but black may be able to push the f-pawn up to f5 at the right moment, Danya, and a queen trade would not help white's chances.
Absolutely not. So queen e5 would have to be met with queen h4. You have to keep the queens on the board. Right now, you have to defend this pawn because this pawn is the linchpin of white's entire kingside operation. Lose this pawn, and then you're also going to drop another pawn on d4. So Yali is burning a lot of clock here. I think he's trying to figure out how to defend this pawn. Does he bring this rook in? Does he lift the rook up to f3? He's got a minute on the clock, and he just seems discombobulated here.
Yeah, but rook f3 is a multi-purpose move. You're lifting up your rook so you can go after the black king. You'd also bring your second rook on over to f1. Is committal, though, because black at some point could take the a file. Queen e5, as you mentioned. At the right moment, rook to a8. Give me that a file. It's open. But this is a situation, Daniel, where white needs to win the game. I like the direction it's heading. Even if he loses, a draw is the same as a loss. You have to go for it.
Yeah, you do. And queen h4 is totally automatic. That is the luxury of being in a must-win situation. You don't even need to consider options, as you're saying, that lead, let's say, to a lifeless endgame. And so you can play certain moves a lot faster than you otherwise would play them in a regular game, even if they entail, let's say, sacrificing the pawn on d5, which, by the way, I wouldn't take. I would just play rook be8 and chill.
Queen takes d5 is a hard move to pass up. And I think the reason why you wouldn't take that pawn is the white queen may slide into black's camp, maybe into e7 at the right moment, and there could be some issues that black would have to deal with. Not to mention queen d5 could be by bishop b3. So he goes b4.
Jaime adding some Tabasco sauce to the queen side.
He says, why not? Let's open the b file. And at some point, that bishop on b6 can take the knight on d4. I wouldn't rush that choice, but you can play it, and that opens the b file for the rook. The d5 pawn is still under attack, Danya. I'm not sure when black should take it, if black should take it, but it is capturable.
It is capturable, but you have to now reckon with bishop b3 followed by bishop takes f7. That seems really dangerous, especially with 30 seconds now on the clock for Jaime, who seems nervous. White has built up a massive initiative on the king side. Every single one of White's pieces is now participating in the king side pressure. 20 seconds now for Jaime. Maybe just rook be8 or bishop c5. Just force White to show his hand. Bishop f5 maybe?
Oh, that's such a good move. Bishop f5. Probably hard to spot, but you want knight c6 jumps, and you're trying to get rid of the light square bishops. Without those on the board, then white has the upper hand. I get this move, though. That's the most natural move.
I would play bishop f5 again.
Queen h6 as well?
Oh my gosh, queen h6, rook c2.
I don't have a follow-up, do I?
And he's gone bishop f5. He's seen it.
Yeah. No, that's a much better find. He finds the good tactic, and I think black is toast.
Toast. Because queen takes h6 on bishop e8 results in mate on h7. Queen takes h6, resigns.
Yeah, just direct path towards checkmate. The rook on g3 is loose, and that was critical in the previous position. Wait, he plays rook f4.
Which is also winning. I mean, the crazy thing is queen takes h6 can hardly be stopped. He tries, though. You don't want to give black a new lease on life here. Queen takes h6 was elementary Eric there.
And black has 6.5 seconds left. So if Jaime Santos Latasa survives this, he deserves all the credit.
Whoa.
Wait, trade. It's mate.
It's mate in one.
Oh, goodness. And it's a win for white. That equalizes the match, Johnny, which means we are going to see Armageddon with bidding. So that is going to be super exciting as the players will have to submit their bid. The side that puts the lower number in gets the black pieces, but if the game is a draw, the player with the black pieces gets a win. We will explain that in more detail, but Donnie, I believe other games are still in progress.
Yes, they are. So let me hunt down which games specifically are in progress. Let's go back to our Sahakyan Sarana match, which is a developing story as Samvel Sahakyan loses the first two games, wins on demand in the previous game, and now has to win another game on demand in order to force our second Armageddon. Doesn't look too promising for him, but it's a playable endgame, and looks like the eval bar favors him slightly.
Yeah, because look at the pawn structure, right? Black has an uncompromised pawn structure. Everything seems copacetic. We're happy about how things are going. But black is now, the problem is cramped. You're attacking one pawn, but as you're pointing out, white is going to push the pawns up the board. Doesn't look too fun for black at the moment.
Yeah, the problem isn't really structural, as you're saying. It's spatial, right? Black is just super cramped. White has this classic idea of f5 and g6, driving the pawns down the board, creating a passer, and the knight on h5 is really, really out of the game. It's obviously pressuring f4, so it's doing something, but White's last move really highlights the awkwardness of the knight. The rooks could double on the h-file. You could easily lose a minor piece here in a time scramble.
Blunders happen in all positions, but especially this one. It looks like black can hardly move it. Alexei Sarana, he had a commanding 2-0 lead in this match.
Unbelievable.
You look at him. I mean, he is not happy, and he's also down on the clock. And isn't Rook H2 just
and Rook
lights
H4,
out?
Rook H4, Bishop F3, and Rook 1 H3.
Beautiful.
And Bishop G2, not
Rook
quite
back.
over.
No, it is.
And Knight G1.
Exactly. Wonderful
Whoa.
geometry, wonderful spot by you. And Sahakyan, he's a man on a mission right now. His mission is to get to Singapore for the OES Finals, June 22nd and 26th. And he's taking this game. Black is going to lose a piece.
Just look at the intensity in his face. He sees it. That is the face of a grandmaster who sees the winning path. Black cannot take on E2. That's the problem with the knight on H5. White's rooks are doubled up on the H file and stare down the barrel of the rook on H8. Alexei trying to confuse matters with F5. Where's the knockout blow?
En passant. Just he doesn't take en passant? Wait, wasn't that a good chance just to get after Black's loose pieces? He goes king E3.
Totally.
He's still much better done it, but it does feel like Black is more solid now because the bishop is defended and it's defending that knight.
And this is Fortress City. You can play bishop takes F5 with tactics, but that blunders bishop takes E2 and knight G3 check. So this knight has a couple of things left to say. I could totally see this blunder happening. Samvel, he's down to 20 seconds. I think he realizes that he should have taken en passant, but it's too late.
You know what he can do, Danya? Focus his attention to the other side of the board. That B7 pawn is a weakness. Can he play knight C1, knight B3, knight A5?
You absolutely can, because the king is holding the F pawn. 3 seconds for Samvel.
Oh, he spent way too much time there. Is he going for an exchange sack on G4? The knight on H5 is still trapped over there. So that's the good news for White, is that he has some time, maybe not on the clock, but on the board.
Ooh. I think Samvel is just treading water here, trying to get Black low on time. As he decides what to do next, he has to get that knight over to B3. The position's not going to win itself. He keeps shuffling his rooks around. He hasn't gotten anything done in the last 5-7 moves.
Knight G3? So the knight on
Rook
G7
H6
is bad. Rook H6 was an excellent move at some point.
But not anymore. Alexei shuts down the H file. And now maybe even doubles on the H file.
Yeah, he allowed White to double Rook H1
wait.
right now?
Rook takes F4 check, tactics, king E3, defends the pawn. And if White doubles on the H file, Black's bishop is now paralyzed. And White's bishop can go over to F1.
Oh my gosh, Knight G1's happening
Knight
at
G1.
long last.
Oh my lands, what a combination. Knight E2,
winning.
Knight G1. Are you kidding me?
And it's winning. The bishop is pinned. That means it's a win of a piece for White. He has 10 seconds. The increment is helping him out. He is going to tie this match up, Danya.
And Rook takes G1, Rook takes H8. The fact that that Rook was hanging was crucial for White. All that remains is a matter of very simple technique. Bishop D1, get the knight off the board, and win the game.
Yes.
Off you go to the Armageddon.
And he plays it. Look at him. He is playing some great chess under the duress of time trouble. And just take on H5. Oh, you see a Sarana. He slaps his keyboard. He is not happy because this match is going to Armageddon.
2 on-demand victories, not 1. He wins with Black in the King's Indian. He wins with White in an equal endgame, and he forces Armageddon. Now Alexei Sarana is going to have to put this behind him, focus, concentrate, make a good bid, and try to recover and to redeem himself. But it's going to be very, very hard from a psychological standpoint. He just pulled a Danya.
Yeah, you know, when you have the momentum, you're up 2-0, you're feeling great about your chess, you want to go to the second round with that first round victory. Now, you have to go to Armageddon when you thought you had it in the bag. It was a really masterful display of blitz skill from Sahakyan. And we have this matchup underway. And what's going on here?
The score is 1-1 in Shimanov against Ohanyan. Ohanyan, one of the best 15 and 30-second bullet players in the world, and he's also a very good blitz player. He's been improving. The score right now is 1-1, 1 victory apiece. Once the bids are off and once the Armageddon is underway, we will bring that to you, obviously. For now, let's see how their third game fares. Shimanov with the white pieces here.
This looks good for White, because if you take on B2, White will throw in the intermezzo, knight takes E7 check, and then bring the knight out from B1, protecting this rook in the corner. And if you take this knight on C6, don't do it with your queen, because there's a bishop down on G2. That forces you to take with the B7 pawn, and that's a very ugly pawn structure. So I think White has the upper hand.
You're saying it's not worth sacrificing a queen to eliminate this beautiful fianchettoed bishop on G2? Come on. Have you not heard of the concept of positional sacrifice?
I have, but I've not worked on it recently, so I will think about it. But I don't think that's what Black is thinking about here. Ohanyan is probably going to take his bishop on B2, Danya. I feel like in a blitz game, B takes C6 it's kind of tantamount to feeling like a resignation. You do not like your position there.
Also, there's the sunk cost effect where you've already invested over a minute on the move, so you might as well make the sharp move. Otherwise, why were you thinking? You might as well have taken on c6 immediately. He's going to try to muddy the waters. He's going to try to exploit the undefended nature of this knight on e7. Queen b2 to e5 would fork the knight and the e2 pawn, and so Shimanov cannot rest on his laurels. Maybe just go h3 and get the heck rid of that bishop.
Yes, good idea, because the e2 pawn was tender. Black wanted to pile up pressure on that pinned piece. So kicking the bishop back seems very wise. Let's not forget that there's a dark square bishop on g7, a queen on b2, so there could be problems for white on that diagonal. But on the other diagonal, the bishop on g2 stares all the way down to b7, so rook sliding to b1 will hurt black with rook takes b7 to follow.
Which is why I would play queen e5 here. I would double back queen e5, bail out. You're down a pawn, but you can play. You've got opposite colored bishops, and you've got some chances against white's king, especially if you can get white to take on g4 and somewhat damage his kingside pawn structure. This game is very far from over. Ohanyan is devilishly tricky in worse positions. Trust me on that.
And the type of worse he is tactically. He's not a pawn, so materially, but it's going to be a tactical affair, whereas other positions, he would have even material, but would have been strategically lost. So I think he's played some very good moves right now. His b7 pawn is defended. He'll slide his rook away from the diagonal, play b6. And then how does white win? Because white is up a pawn, Danya, but that pawn on g4, it's doubled and already under attack.
It is indeed, and rook b1 counterattacking the b7 pawn. Ohanyan defends it with rook a8. He also gets out of the pin, so he can play b6 now and solidify his entire queenside. I'm kind of liking black's position here, relatively speaking to what he had a couple of moves ago. Shimanov, he's got to make sure his king is safe. Maybe try to get this knight over to d5, but much easier said than done because you don't have the c3 square as of now. But you will after this move.
It's true, but if the knight moves, the g5 pawn was tender, so queen d2, multi-purpose move, protecting g5 another time, protecting the c3 square so the knight can hop back, and black does not really want to give up the dark square bishop, but it's not the end of the world either. We've seen positions where knight can dominate an opponent's bishop, and that knight, for black, can start hopping around.
I would go king g8 here so that after knight c3, you can take on c3 and take on g5 so that queen takes c3 would not be a check. Instead, Ohanyan takes a different approach. He trades the knights, and the opposite colored bishops, Robert, are going to lend to the game a somewhat drawish character. This is not an easy win, and it's easy for black to make a bunch of moves here to gain a little bit of time on the clock. Bishop d4, f6, whatever you want to do, black is solid.
But I like a4 because you were just saying black is solid. So let's chisel at the pawn structure. A pawn chain is only as strong as its base pawn. a7, very hard to get to. b6, more approachable. So let's go a5, swap on b6, and then go after that b6 pawn.
Ohanyan trying to provoke the weakness of the d3 pawn, but that weakness is going to be inaccessible. Another excellent move by Shimanov. He can follow up with king g2 and rook h1. Hey, you want to dance? We're going to dance on the king side. Shimanov wants to go after Ohanyan's throat here.
No, this looks really bad for black all of a sudden. Oh, no, not f6. There will be mates down the h-file at some point. You just play king g2, rook h1, as you were saying. The e-pawn can push for white. The g-pawn can push for white. And that black king is in harm's way.
Well, the Russian school of chess would dictate that you should play a5 at some point, maybe even now, to open up a second front and force black to have to deal with the maximum amount of problems on both sides of the board. Shimanov starts by playing e4. He does yield this big square on d4, but it really doesn't matter because the bishop isn't doing all that much other than looking pretty on d4.
Yeah, and f5 now becomes a huge threat, but then black will play g5. You want to close up those dark squares, and that's what black needs to do, is hope that white's pawns go on light squares, because then black will control the dark.
A look at the time, 10 seconds for black. I would consider playing a5 here, maybe even driving the pawn up to a6. Not sure exactly why. Shimanov scheming, trying to figure out which side of the board he wants to play in. He can also double rooks on the h-file, but you have to make sure that you don't play for black's clock. Ohanyan can play really, really well on his last couple of seconds.
And he's on those last couple of seconds. He plays that move with 3.3 left, 2-second increment per move. He's going to have to be fast. But I like what you said there, Danya, that oftentimes when our opponents are in time trouble, we think that we need to speed up as well. But there's increment here, 2-second increment. There's no winning on time. The player will build back up on their clock, and that could backfire. So I like the way Shimanov's handling this, but he hasn't found a breakthrough.
No, and he's down to 45 seconds, and things are getting a little bit annoying on the queen side. White was the one playing on the queen side. Now it's black opening up the queen side voluntarily to get the b-file open, but here comes f5, and it's devastating.
It is. f6 check, forks the king and queen.
That's it.
h6 is hanging. He resigns, and now Shimanov is up 2-1. That was a powerful attack of opposite-colored bishops. He lands the devastating knockout. He goes 2-1, but Ohanyan will get the white pieces and have a chance to strike back.
And yet another on-demand victory will need to be scored, this time by Amin, the international master from Armenia, in order to force yet another Armageddon. That will be the third one, if in fact he can win the next game with white. The next game is already underway.
Okay, there you go at it, and there will be some Armageddons in this first round of action. We saw Sarana enter Sahakyan. They will go to Armageddon, as will Jaime Santos Latasa and Yali Sokolovsky, if my memory serves me correct. So let's see what's happening here, Danya. It's a very solid affair in the center. There's so much tension there. Who is going to take first?
Well, this is a semi-Tarash that has more or less transposed into a Queen's Gambit accepted structure. I'm kind of getting Nepo Dingley Ren vibes from Nepo's first black victory. That seems like it was years ago, didn't it? It really does this time. And we need to, very typical move, sacrificing the pawn on d4 in order to garner an initiative. I think Shimanov is going to play it more conservatively with bishop e7, or perhaps something like queen b6.
Yeah, taking so many times on d4 allows white's pieces to get free flowing, and the black king is in the center. And Basem Amin also is that 2-2 with Pranesh, so that match will go to Armageddon as well. We have so many fun matches in the first round. It's only going to get more exciting. And for black, I don't think you want excitement in this game done. The king is in the center. Taking on d4 seems like a mistake. So I'm with you. Develop the bishop and then try to castle kingside. I don't love bishop d6. I thought bishop e7, just put it on a more guarded square, but perhaps Shimanov has some idea up his sleeve.
Well, I wonder what he prepares against rook d1, because rook d1 now threatens pawn takes c5, forcing black to react to it. Perhaps Shimanov just wants to move the queen over to c7 and develop as aggressively as he can. He's down a little bit of time on the clock, but presumably Ohanyan is going to take that time in these next couple of moves, because he's got a couple of very important decisions to make. When to take on c5, whether to follow up with b4, whether to start with rook d1, and there's our answer to the first question. He does. Now the second question, does he take on c5 and play b4, or does he push d5, which is another very, very typical way to resolve the central tension in the Queen's Gambit accepted structure?
I think I didn't like bishop d6 because of d5. He decides to take it with bishop e2. Can hardly fault him for that. But I thought that d5 was a bit more pressing. And you're in must-win game. You cannot afford a draw here. So symmetrical structures, I don't think do him any favors. I think he should have played d5.
Agree completely. Now the bishop drops back to d6. Bishop b2 is very likely. Shimanov will castle. And this move, knight c6 to e5, is a very annoying idea because it opens up the long diagonal for black's bishop. White does not have the equivalent idea because knight c3 to e4 is obviously not possible. And there goes Shimanov. He starts with knight e5, but aren't there some tactics here with maybe knight takes e5 and knight takes b5?
Ooh, that looks spicy. And the problem for black is the king remains in the center. I think the h2 pawn is hanging with check in some of the positions, but this is getting tactical. So, Donnie, I'm with you. Knight takes e5, step one. And after bishop takes e5, there could be a knight sacrifice or pawn to f4. That's also a way to hit the bishop on f4 and then threaten knight takes b5.
I think f4 is a more measured approach. You're right. Knight takes b5. There might be bishop takes h2. Still has to be calculated. King h1 there. A takes b5. It's clear that Ohanyan is calculating exactly that. But I think f4 is a very nice middle ground because you force black either to give up the bishop pair and uncontested control of the dark squares, or if black drops the bishop back in that position, I think knight takes b5 will come with even greater effect. Right.
Did you see him, though? I mean, Amin seems beside himself. He's upset about something. He's been fixing the location of his laptop. He is trying desperately to score a victory here, and f4 is a step in the right direction. If bishop d6 is played, Danya, it's going to look like a Naroditsky game. Sacrifices galore, accurate ones that leave black in huge trouble, and that was a mistake.
Well, I don't know about the accurate part, but I don't know if I'd be able to resist the temptation to take on b5 here because you do get 2 pawns for the piece. Now, if you want to take a more measured approach, you can play something like rook a to c1, and with 1 minute on the clock, Ohanyan has to make a decision here.
Knight takes b5 has to be it. You need this win, and the best way to do it is going after the opponent's king. I think objectively, it's the correct decision, but for a blitz game, it still would be correct, even if the engine says, nah, not so fast.
Without question. Then you take back on b5. You can swing the queen at the right moment over to the other side of the board. Your bishops are rampaging along the diagonals, and here we go. Buckle your seatbelts, folks. Shimanov has to accept the sacrifice, and the engine, it approves.
Brilliant move, and it's a great idea. The black king will be in harm's way. White's pieces are coordinated. And look at the bishops. They're lurking back on a2 and b2, but they're long-range pieces. They are staring into black's camp. And look at Shimanov. He wasn't expecting this. He is settled down for a think because his best move might be to castle his king and to say, I'm down a pawn. My position stinks. I think he'll lose that position, so he might as well take the knight for the couple pawns and have his king just running around the board. But a great decision from Ohanyan.
Well, if you're Shimanov, you need something to suffer for. You need a little bit of extra time on the clock. I like the fact that he took on b5 relatively quickly. I was struggling to figure out a clear follow-up for white. Sometimes all you want to really do is just play slowly, bring the rook into the game. You don't have to win the game in 2 moves here. Just keep accumulating the pressure. He gives a check on c5. He could follow up with rook ac1 hitting the bishop, or after king g8, you could consider the move queen to g5 to x-ray the king along the g file. But Ohanyan has to make these decisions quickly, and he does, and this was wrong, but it's totally natural. Can you blame him for playing rook a to c1 here?
No, but now that I know it's the wrong move, I think he should have taken the knight on f6, Danya. Black would have had to take with the pawn and then slam your rook down on d7. Get control of the 7th rank. And I don't think that Black's dark square bishop had any room to roam. And that would have been a good chance going after both the bishops and the Black king. So you're right. It's an understandable miss. I think that Black's natural move, like bishop to d8, you're just backtracking, doesn't look very pleasant. You could also play bishop d5. Maybe that's a way to control the d file.
You need to figure out a way to douse the flames of white's initiative, because right now Black is now 30 seconds on the clock. Gee, I wonder whose position is easier to play with 30 seconds. I think Ohanyan might meet bishop d8 with f5, and Shimanov, he finds bishop d5, and he forces an exchange of minor pieces, which is going to make his defensive task a whole lot easier. I think bishop takes f6 can be considered. Then bishop takes a2 is probably what Shimanov was calculating, but queen g5 there. Is there queen f8 and he holds on? What's the line after bishop f6?
There's also bishop d5, knight d5, rook takes d5, and that looks like you gain material. But he's 8 seconds. He has to make a move. He's frozen.
Oh my gosh, bishop f6 with 4 seconds on the clock. And I get it. Now, bishop b6 also exists. You could throw in that intermezzo to try to toss the queen out of c5, and he plays it.
Brilliant move. And queen c3
1
is
second.
available. And now g7 is under attack. So this is scary for the Black king, but he's playing accurate moves.
Queen takes f4 is a saving grace. Queen takes f4. And the queen rampages out of its gate. He missed it, but he's still in pretty good shape here.
Yeah, he's going after the e3 pawn, and he is attacking the rook on d5. But look at this. You're setting everything up, protecting one another. But queen takes e3. Can you just take that pawn?
Or king g7, coordinating the rooks. That pawn, it moves up to e4. Setting up queen g3, but Shimanov forces the exchange of pieces. Remember, all he needs is a draw.
Yeah, he's getting that half point at least. He is up a bishop for just 2 pawns. The Black king is now tucked away in the corner with a blanket on top of him. Those pawns are shielding him just enough. And I think that for Ohanyan, the best opportunity is behind him. And look at this coordination from Black.
Well, it is 3 pawns technically, but it's Black's pawns are doing a great job of soaking up the effect of White's pawn majority. White's pawns are not really going anywhere. Queen takes f3 and rook d4. I don't like that decision, though, by Shimanov, because now White's pawns are really rolling forward. I thought he should have kept the queens on the board because his king, believe it or not, was actually safer. So let's see if he can navigate the complexities here successfully. We have an all-out time scramble. All Black needs is a draw. Maybe trade the rooks.
Whoa, rook d2. Aren't you just allowing those pawns to run forward? That was a mistake.
He stops them.
Yeah, a5 was the wrong pawn to push. He could have pushed his b pawn first. And now, unfortunately for White, he cannot move his pawns without losing them. Bishop d2 is it possible? Let's just steal the pawns instead.
He did have rook g1 check, but Black would have had checkmate on h2. It's over. I mean, all Black needs is a draw here. Shimanov doesn't even need to try to win this. Just king d5. Make sure you don't blunder anything. Make sure you don't lose on time. Ooh. Just be careful. Don't let the pawns through. Rook b5, rook a5 could be a little bit annoying in some positions.
And don't play bishop takes b4.
1
Sometimes
second.
you give up the piece. You gotta move. He does get the move off. He was trying to find a draw, but he's inviting the White king to the action.
He's panicking, and he gives up the bishop. I really don't like that. Rook, can White win a pawn?
No. Rook h5, rook f5
king
coming.
d4, king f2. Black's king is weirdly cut off here.
Yeah.
So Ohanyan can keep trying. Oh my gosh. What has Shimanov done to himself? Look at this, h5.
He barely has a move. But the h5 there's rook g5.
And f4 there's king e4. It's a draw.
Play rook f4. Play rook f4 now. He's got to play rook f4.
Got to do it. 3 seconds.
He's going to repeat once, I think.
Rook d6 can be tried as well, but then Black has h5 with 1 second left. He's got to make a move.
And play rook f4. Now, if he plays rook f4...
Doesn't see it.
He might play f4, f5. Maybe that's his idea, but it's not going to work out.
F4 wins.
F4.
He missed it.
Oh, my gosh. F4, f5.
And now he has to avoid 3-time repetition. He's got to be really careful. h5 is coming. But
But
it's not
h5
good
rook
enough.
g5. No, it's not good
Exactly.
enough.
And f4, it's too late because the king can move to e4.
Rook h5 again. Oh, he could have tried the same idea.
Rook f4,
Wow.
rook f6. Shermanov suddenly hanging by a thread.
King
Oh,
g3
he's
is
cut
coming.
the king off. Oh my gosh, he's going to win.
I really feel like he has good winning chances, but he should have went king g3 first.
Because now the king can try to make it through g2, but then there will be rook g6, rook g3.
So he's kept the rook in place. Now f4 is loose. King's coming to h3. Black will have h5 to keep the king out, and maybe that's what's needed, but the pawn will be loose there.
Rook a4. Try to skewer the pawn from the other side.
Yes.
Too much moving around, aimless moving around to the king. You got to go rook a4 or rook e8. Good job by Ohanyan there.
Okay,
what
no
now?
progress. Yeah, because you can't play rook g8, rook g5. You'd love to try to trade and get a pass pawn, but the black king is too close. This is a draw now.
Shermanov can just basically move the rook laterally along the 5th rank. He can move the king back and forth. Rook a5. Just don't blunder the rook. And he's going to force it.
Yeah, he's really beside himself there. He had good winning chances, but now he has none. That means it's going to be a match victory for Shermanov. He is going to take this, and you see Ohanyan, how much it means to him. He still has a good chance. Reminder to everybody, it's 3 match losses before your ticket to Singapore is no longer in availability, and you see Ohanyan just jump off camera. But Shermanov, he played tough defense, and he earned match victory.
He absolutely did. We thought he had it in the bag. He panicked, gave up his bishop, and white was even winning. At least at one moment, he could have played f4. Ohanyan is going to realize that, and it's going to take a while for him to forgive himself. But the good news is that he's not out of the tournament. He has 2 more strikes and plenty of opportunities to redeem himself as we have a look at the current scoreboard. Obviously, 2 matches are tied, and they will go to Armageddon very shortly.
And we had some forfeitures, and Rachmanov was a recipient of one of those. But Bortnick, he earned every bit of his match victory against Nguyen. Sarana and Sahakyan going to Armageddon, but Amin and Pranesh will do the same. And we had 4 more matches. We just saw the match between Shermanov and Ohanyan finish. But Dana, I guess there's only one match to be impressed by, Bortnick. Everyone else played sturdy defense. And Shermanov takes it against Ohanyan. Sargsyan, he sweeps 3-0, and Santos and Sokolovsky, we are going to see them go to Armageddon, while Reed Samadov, I don't think he showed up either, so Chigaev, he sails through with that match victory. But we get Armageddon. I think that everybody's stoked about that.
Absolutely, and Armageddon has a whole lot of strategizing, because we're not talking about 15-minute chess anymore, right, where you can bid 12 minutes, 11 minutes, if you really want the black pieces. We're talking about 5 minutes. So you really can't go down really past 4 minutes, I would think.
No, because then you're too low in the clock. There is no increment in Armageddon. So just a refresher for everybody. The base time is 5 minutes. You can bid as low as you want. You could bid 1 second, but you'll flag on the 4th move of the game. So with 5 minutes, let's say Danya bids 4 minutes and 30 seconds, and I bid 4 minutes. I get 4 minutes on my clock. I will choose the black pieces. He will get 5 minutes. He has the white pieces. He needs to win the game. And with the black pieces and 4 minutes, I would need to make a draw, and that would sail me through. Or, of course, I could win the game, and that would also let me win the match. So Armageddon is black pieces. They just need a draw, but they start with less time.
And a lot of people forget that in Armageddon, there is no increment. Even though in the main tournament, there is a 2-second increment. Remember that in the Armageddon, there is exactly a 0-second increment. You get no time addition after each move carried out, which means, what does that mean? It means if you have a rook versus rook position, one side has a minute, the other side has 5 seconds. I don't think we're going to see any draw for us in that kind of situation.
Draws are off the table. Black must score a victory. White must score a victory, in Armageddon. And that means that you are just playing until the very last moves, and you are just going to try to flag your opponent. No increment. You want to win on time.
You want to win on time, and you don't want to over-rely on the clock. You don't want to think that you can just do just about anything, because all of these players, particularly the ones participating in the Armageddon games, are incredibly fast. They can make 30 seconds, 15 seconds go a really, really long way. So I think the best Armageddon players are ones who treat the Armageddon game like any game. They play the same openings they normally play, but with the white pieces, you obviously want to refrain from anything that lends the game too drawish of a character.
Yeah, so we are going to receive the bids and see what the players have chosen. But the Armageddon rules, they are bidding for the right to choose their color. As we've said, the lower bid wins and starts with that time. The opponent starts with 5 minutes. There is no time added per move, and black wins the match with a draw. So, Danya, you said you wouldn't really bid below 4 minutes. How low really would you go?
4 minutes as an absolute minimum. I would probably go 4:15, 4:30, because, I mean, those 30 seconds, those 45 seconds are absolutely huge. That could be the difference, those 45 seconds, between getting a winning position out of the opening and missing your chance. So I really wouldn't go below 4 minutes. Of course, a lot of it, Robert, depends on your experience level and your speed and time scrambles.
Yeah, if you are a great bullet chess player, in bullet chess, sometimes you start with as low as 10 seconds in hyper bullet, or ultra bullet, or whatever it's called at this point. But for the players who are more experienced playing with just a few seconds on their clock, they will not mind bidding a low amount of time. But I think some of the less experienced players, those who preferred longer time controls, they're going to need their time, and they wouldn't mind starting with the white pieces if their opponent bids too low.
And we have the bids. We also have the games. Both games have begun. We will start with the Alexei Sarana Samvel Sahakyan game, which featured a scintillating comeback by the Armenian Grandmaster. 2 wins on demand, forcing Armageddon, and their Armageddon game has just begun. So, Robert, Samvel has the white pieces. Alexei bid 4:15. He has the black pieces and draw odds. Here we go.
And Samvel bid 455. He really wanted the white pieces, and so he gets them. And we have a London system right now. Black is challenging in the center. We saw positions just like this in the World Championship. And knight h5, attacking the bishop on f4. Down it, usually the pawn goes up to h3, so the bishop can slide back to h2. Not available here.
Not available here. You're going to have to part ways with your bishop, but White's trying to do it on his own terms. He's saying, hey, if you want to take my bishop, you're going to have to let my knight dive into e5, or you're going to have to seriously weaken the king side. I think this is a pretty well-known line. White hasn't done anything wrong here, but I like Alexei's choice from a practical standpoint. It's pretty easy to play this with black.
I've played it from the black side. This knight can take the bishop on g7 on g3 at any moment, or if the bishop moves, it can always backtrack to g7 and reroute to f5. So look at this. Opening up the center is Samvel Sahakyan. He needs to win this game. Black has draws, so he strikes in the center. But Donna, is this a good move? It's just a natural move. Whose chances do you like right now?
Well, I like White's chances visually, but I wouldn't overreact if I'm Alexei. I would consider doing something very simple, taking the bishop, taking the pawn on e4, and dropping the bishop back to e7, because Black's position is fundamentally sound. Even though the king may seem very flimsy, White does not have the firepower nor the horsepower, literally, to exploit, these weaknesses that surround Black's king. So Samvel is going to have to do it a little bit slower than that, maybe bring the rook to d1, other rook to e1. The battle, Robert, I think is going to revolve not around the king side, but in the center.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And the center can be opened up. There's a lot of tension there between the e4 and d5 pawns. And black could consider pushing the pawn up to d4. I wouldn't advise it necessarily, because the bishop on b6 is probably black's best piece, staring into the white position at f2 and g1. But if you're afraid of the e-file opening up, black could in fact push that pawn up to d4.
I think a lot of people would be tempted to take on d5 and induce an isolated pawn. The problem is that queen on e2 would end up in the crosshairs of a rook that comes to e8, and that would potentially precipitate a bunch of heavy piece trades, which is the last thing that you want if you're Samvel in a must-win situation.
Yeah, and look at the clock, by the way. Sarana started with a 45-second deficit. Now it's only about 6, 5, 4. He's about to be even on the clock. And as you're pointing out, queen takes g3 is a huge threat. The bishop on b6 pins the pawn on f2.
Don't panic if you're Samvel. Keep the tension. I love the move knight f1. Keep the central tension as long as possible. Try to rebuild that time advantage, but don't do it at the expense of your position. And if you're Alexei, same thing. Keep the tension. Don't spend too long on each individual decision. He decides to release the tension with d takes e4. I love that decision because, again, it's all about ease, right? How simple is your position to play? And he's just trying to get all the pieces off the board.
Why not? I mean, black just needs a draw here, even on the clock, even on the board here. But if we look at the dynamics, and if we cut the board in half, as you know I like to do, white has an extra pawn from A through C file, and that could be good in some endgames because it's very far away from black's pieces.
And black, of course, has the 4-on-3 on the king side, but white's got that very compact pawn mass on the king side, which is going to make it hard in a potential pawn endgame to make it hard for black to create a passed pawn. But it's far in the future. Samvel is creating space, staking his claim in the center. G4, Robert, very committal.
I like it though, because if white can play g5 at the right moment, he's going to carve out the e5 square for a knight, and that could be problematic. And I like this decision as well. Rook e1. Let us not trade rooks. Let's keep more pieces on the board. That's enough firepower to launch an attack at the black king.
And Alexei saying, hey, let's dance. He brings the queen to f4. That's a good move practically, even though the eval bar didn't like it. He's hitting the g4 pawn, trying to force Samvel's hand. Samvel could consider the move g5. That would be a positional sacrifice. You called out that idea of carving out the e5 square, but I wouldn't advise that in a low time situation. I would do something more straightforward, like bishop takes c6 and knight d4.
That also looks really good, but g5 is so tempting. You shatter black's pawn structure on the king side, but he plays your idea. You are the #1 rated blitz player on the site. I don't know if you are at this very moment, but you probably are, because you often tend to be up there. And knight d4, go after 2 pawns at once. e6 is hanging, c6 is hanging. How does black defend both? I'm not seeing a way.
e5, knight takes c6, bishop takes g4. There's this move f3, and suddenly all of black's pieces, save the queen, are hanging. Alexei has to invest some time to calculate this out. His position is on fire right now.
Yeah, and his king is more exposed than white's king, but black now down 20 seconds on the clock. You know that Alexei is trying to find a way out. He gives up this c6 pawn for nothing.
For nothing. White now has a 3-on-1 on the queen side. He's got an ideally placed knight on e3 that's contesting this key square on d5. He has many ways to improve his position. Rook d1. He can play a3 and try to set those pawns in motion. He can play c4 immediately. The key thing for Samvel, he's less experienced of a time scramble, Robert, so you don't want this to descend into time scramble madness. You want to keep some time on your clock, and that's exactly what he's doing.
Yeah, he needs to play quickly, though, because if they're down to their final 10 seconds, we all know who the favorite is, and it is Alexei Sarana, unless Samvel's up a queen and checkmating. Like, he needs to keep enough time on the clock. He's doing it well right now, and black's moves are just more difficult. Black's down a pawn. White has passers roaming up the queen side. A queen e4 doesn't threaten anything, as far as I can see. Push him, and don't stop.
White's pawns continue to roam. Bishop d5 can be met with f3. If I'm Alexei, I'm in desperation mode. I'm going f5 and trying to stir up complications on the king side while you still have a chance, because once white's pawns reach c6 and b5, and they already did, that's it. The opportunity train has sailed by. Black is dead lost.
Black can't do anything. I don't see any tries for him. He goes queen d4. He'll try to go after one of the pawns. Maybe a timely a6 to break down the b5 c6 pawn chain. If the b5 pawn is off the board, then black does have legitimate chances, but white can reinforce it with pawn to a4. Let's just swap. I am going to push my pawn up to b6 if you ever push your pawn to a6.
Love the measured way that Samvel is playing. He realizes that he's also up on time. He doesn't need to do anything committal. He can just milk Alexei's clock all the way down. He's already done that. Alexei down to 1 minute and 9 seconds. And the simple a4 reinforces the pawn chain and keeps the connected passers alive. Barring a miracle of miracles, Robert, this game is over. Queen c5 forces the queens off the board. I think it's a last-ditch attempt by Alexei. It ain't going to work.
Oh, but I don't love c7. It's objectively a perfectly good move, but it allows black to clamp down on the light squares. I see queen c5. I get what you're saying, but you know what I mean, Danya? Where now suddenly the pawns don't move so quickly, and they might be targeted. And look at the clock. We said that Samvel has to be keeping a big lead on time because of how quick Sarana is. He plays queen c5. I think you can even swap queens and then just quickly try to bring king f7, king e7, and so on.
And the debilitating thing is rook a1, tactically tricky move, runs into queen e7 check, liberating the queen from the clutches of its vis-a-vis, and then white can simply take on a1. Alexei is dwindling on his clock, 43 seconds now, and even the speediest bullet player would not be able to pull this out. Barring a mouse slip, Robert, I think this one's over.
Yeah, I think he spent way too much time on this move, and the chances were slim to begin with on his turn. He plays king f7. All things considered, it's a decent move. If the queens are swapped on d4, black gets a passed pawn of his own, but as you're indicating, knight d5 looks just devastating. You're threatening with the queen. If the queen trade happens, that knight will hop forward into a square like b6, but I think for Alexei, you just have to move quickly. I know the position is lost no matter what you do. Oh, he takes there and wants to go knight d6. That is great tactical awareness.
What an inventive tactical solution. Rook c7, knight d6 was a discovered check. Now all he has to do is close his eyes and push his pawns and win the bishop and win the game and keep some time on his clock. This is resignable. b7's coming. He's going to make 2 queens.
Can't stop it. B7 happens. Rook B7, knight D6 check is a fork, winning the rook. This is going to be a win for Samvel Sahakyan. And Donna, you know what that means? 3 consecutive wins on demand for him.
Absolutely unbelievable. What resilience, what gumption by Samvel Sahakyan. I'm going to flip us over to the other game, which is in its concluding stages. Yael Sokolovsky is about to win his game on demand with white against Santos Latasa. He has just won. Unbelievable performance by the international master from Israel. I told you, Robert, this guy is nothing to sneeze at.
For sure not. He also was in must-win territory. He won game 4, then he go into Armageddon, and he wins the Armageddon game when he had to. So, oh my goodness. We see an upset, at least by ratings here, but you called it. You are the prophet for a reason.
Incredible. What a performance by Sokolovsky. He is going to make his presence felt in subsequent years in online events as he defeats one of Spain's most brightest talents, Jaime Santos Latasa, who is 1 strike closer to getting eliminated from this tournament.
And Don, I think we have one more game remaining in Bassem Amin taking on his opponent. So, whoa, wait, where's the queen? So Pranesh is just down to queen?
Pranesh is down to queen, and Bassem has plenty of time. He's got 30 seconds on his clock. All he has to do is avoid stalemate.
And the evaluation bar has not caught up from the previous game. It's completely winning for white at this stage. Just do not stalemate the black king. B8 queen. Queen 8 is mate. And that sends Bassem Amin through. He wins the first match.
He does indeed. And the score after their regular games was 2-2. But Bassem Amin, the doctor, the surgeon, showing some surgical precision in his Armageddon game. What a big win.
Whew. Huge win for Bassem Amin. He was given the wild card, and he has validated that selection. And we see in the scoreboard, Bortnick took down Nguyen 2.5. We just watched Sahakyan storm back. He was down 2-0 to Alexei Sarana. He wins 3-2 in the end, based on the Armageddon game. Rachmanov, well, he had a forfeit win, and Jose Martinez, he will not be playing in round 2 either, so that will not be in the pairings. Bassem Amin, we witnessed him up a queen. He takes down Pranesh, but that was a nail-biter, Danya. I mean, these matches are just so close.
So close indeed, and as we stated at the beginning, you have to ignore titles, you have to ignore FIDE ratings. It's all about experience level, it's all about nerves, and the biggest story of the round, Robert, I think a pretty uncontroversial statement, Samvel Sahakyan winning 2 on demand, and then delivering a brilliant performance in the Armageddon from a dubious position to defeat one of the mainstays of online chess in Alexei Sarana. He is off to a great start. He moves 1 step closer to Singapore.
And Yael Sokolovsky also did what may have seemed like the unthinkable. He won a game on demand in the 4th game. Then he wins in the Armageddon. He takes down the much higher rated Jaime Santos Latasa. So we know which players are sitting at 1 match victory thus far. And some, they're not going to be as happy as others because we saw the Bortnicks and the Sahakyans and the Sokolovskys. They got some wins. We saw some forfeits where players just didn't show up today and may not show up for the rest of the day, which is very unfortunate, but it sometimes does happen. But let's look at our standings. Let's look at our leaderboard because we do have some players winning their first match. Happy campers include Bortnick, Sarana, Shimanov, Sargsyan. Jaime Santos Latasa actually lost his game. We will amend that for you. We just witnessed him lose that game. But Chigaev and Rachmanov, the Russian duo, they took their first matches. So, Danya, I mean, anyone has a shot. It is 3 wins, and you get to go to Singapore, 3 match losses, and you go home. So even if you lost the first one, still have more chances to go.
And that's going to be the big question in round 2. Those who won, who are swimming in the waves of success, yeah, it's easy to come to the second round. You feel good. You feel like you're getting closer. But how are the players who lost their first match going to respond? How is Amin Nguyen, who was infuriated by his performance against Shimanov, how is he going to respond? How is Pranesh going to respond? Will we see any comeback stories from the players, Robert, who lost their first matchup? That's what I'm going to be looking forward to seeing in round 2.
It's the big question. It has been a roller coaster affair thus far. So the players who just lost, they'll get some time. They'll get a break, maybe eat some refreshments, take a walk, but it will just be a few minutes. And in the meantime, we are going to join the players for that break. So if you're watching, do not go anywhere. We will be back in just a few minutes. Stay tuned for more from the OES Preliminaries.
Chess.com's game review recently got a major update. Here are 4 key notes. At the end of each game review, you will now see a summary of the game from your coach, your performance rating for that game, and a quick grade for you and your opponent in the opening, middle game, and end game. We've added a new classification called miss for when a move fails to take advantage of an opportunity, but it is otherwise a sound move. We've also changed the definition of blunder. Now a move will only be considered a blunder if it loses material or allows a checkmate. Coach will now draw arrows and highlight squares when you hover over or click on the highlighted words in the move explanations. This should make move explanations easier to follow. Finally, Coach's explanations will now reference specific pieces and threats in the explanations, making move explanations much more intuitive. The new game review experience is available on Chess.com right now.
Welcome back, everybody. This is the inaugural Olympic Esports Series. I'm Grandmaster Robert Hess. Alongside me is my good friend, Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, and this is the chess event at the Olympic Esports Series. We have 8 contestants who won their opening round matchup. They are going to square off against one another. Danya, were you surprised by anything that we saw from these 8 contestants?
Well, yes and no. I think it's incredibly exciting to see the lower rated players do so incredibly well. As we look at the standings, we see some of the mainstays, right? Alexander Bortnick, obviously Alexei Sarana, he ended up losing that match, which was a surprise in its own right. But we got a couple of wins by forfeit, so I'm excited to see Maxim Chigaev and Alexander Shimanov and the other players who won by forfeit. I want to see how they actually play.
Yeah, no, it's going to be good to see the players who DQ'd at the start come back. Alexander Bortnick, he looked very powerful against Nguyen from Vietnam. So these matchups in the first round were difficult. The matchups in the second, they don't really get any easier. So without further ado, let's bring you those second round matchups, because Bortnick, he's still the 1 seed. He took care of business in the opening match. He takes on Chigaev. And Amin, he did in fact win his first round match. He takes on Sahakyan. Sahakyan, probably the hero of the first matches.
Absolutely. He wins 2 games on demand to force Armageddon. He plays an incredible Armageddon against one of the best clutch players in online chess history, and I don't think that's an exaggeration given Alexei Sarana's performance in online chess events. Sahakyan wins the first match, but you can't rest on your laurels, Robert, because you have a very difficult second round matchup. Amin is solid. He's a great blitz player. He's a little bit less experienced, but he ain't going to be an easy customer. As we look at the second page of matchups, Aditya Mittal, sadly, he forfeited his first round, and his reward, hey, you got Jaime Santos Latasa, an angry Jaime Santos Latasa, who lost to one of the only international masters in the field.
And Samadov, he is also playing this round. He DQ'd the first. Jose Martinez, the only player it seems that will DQ this second round. He is playing Ohanyan. So Ohanyan, he gets a free match victory. That's good news for him. That ends his day. We're only seeing 2 rounds of action today, 3 tomorrow. But still plenty of exciting chess. Some great matchups ahead. Danya, this is the OES, and the preliminary stage is very intense.
It is indeed, and we're going to have one of the best problems that we have as commentators. We will have too many games to look at. Hey, I would take that any day over not enough games. We are going to be jumping between these fascinating matchups. We're going to try to bring you all of the entertaining moments, all of the watershed moments in these matches. But I'm particularly excited to see our highest-rated players and our most experienced blitz players, as well as Yali Sokolovsky and the team of international masters, who are not going to go gentle into that good night, as Sokolovsky showed against Santos Latasa.
Yes, Sokolovsky won his first round matchup despite being the underdog by title, by rating. He did not care, and he is at a perfect 1-0 score, match score thus far, and he would like to continue that up. But Alexander Bortnick, he will take on Maxim Chigaev. Chigaev is super strong. He fights with the best of them on Chess.com. Bortnick is amongst the best, and he's going to have his hands full.
Well, Bortnick is incredible. His reputation precedes itself, Robert, but Maxim Chigaev, a somewhat lesser-known name, and yet he always scores in the top 20 in Title Tuesday. He's super solid, 2,600-plus Grandmaster, never an easy opponent. But Alexander Bortnick, I think he needs to try to win this match on the openings and on speed.
Well, let's see their first moves get underway. Bortnick, he is very fast, as you are indicating. Really one of the best bullet chess players on the site. For those unfamiliar, bullet chess is when players usually start with 1 minute for the entire game, for all of their moves. And Bortnick plays at the highest level. In that time control, in Blitz, when you get a little bit more time, like here we have 3 minutes plus 2 seconds added per move, he is still among the best winning events, like titled Tuesday on Chess.com. So Bortnick, he gets Chigaev. He knows he's the favorite. He is the better Blitz player, but Chigaev is no slouch whatsoever.
Oh, absolutely not. And we saw some jitters, right, from Alexander Bortnick to start his first round against Nguyen. There were some blunders, there were some mistakes, and yet once he settled in, he is an absolute buzzsaw. He's already settled in. He's gotten those jitters out of the way. He's gotten the first round victory out of the way, and Alexander Bortnick has to be sitting pretty. And yet, you need to score 3 victories. You don't want to say, yeah, I already won one. I can lose one. It's okay. I'll be on 50%. That's not how you're supposed to think. You want to win the first 3 matchups so that you don't have to win any games or any matches on demand.
Yeah, because you don't want to be watching the OES Finals from your couch. You'd rather be there playing. And let's review the format of this event for those of you who may just be tuning in or you forgot because that first round of action was a whirlwind. This is a blitz time control where it's a best of 4 game matches. The players have 3 minutes and they get 2 seconds added per move. And with 2.5 points, you take the match. If not, if it's 2-2, we get Armageddon. We just saw a few matches go to Armageddon. Super exciting stuff, but I think the players would rather win in regular time. And Dana, we have the opening moves in Bortnick against Chigaev.
We do indeed. Sasha Bortnick with the white pieces in what is called an Alekhine Chatard Gambit in the French. Bortnick playing the mainline French with knight c3 and an early h2, h4. That pawn ended up being sacrificed, which leads to a semi-open h-file, Robert, for white. This is a very, very good line in blitz because the knight can come out to g5. The other knight can come out to b5. Early going. I like what I see from Bortnick.
I play this my entire childhood from the white side, and you just create so much pressure against black's position. You are down a pawn, but when you don't have pawns, you have open files, and you're indicating the open h-file should give white a ton of play here. So g6 is a good starting move for black. h5 is likely next, but you have to watch out for sacrifices. Black is just moving pawns, white is moving pieces, and white's king is about to get castled to the queen side, so black needs to be very careful.
And there are some positions where you could just leave the queen on g4 because h takes g4 leads to rook takes h8. Now here, of course, you don't want to do that because the knight can cover the check. So Bortnick does drop the queen back. That also creates the potential for a knight sack on d5. Anytime, Robert, and you know this a lot better than I do, you'll co-sign this point. Anytime black plays c5, you stick that knight on b5 faster than the speed of sound. And so Chigaev has to contort himself in order to prevent all of these sacrifices. Now, I think Sasha can just castle queenside. He's chilling.
I had to make sure that Chigaev was alive and well there. He barely moved, and that's how concentrated he is on the chessboard. He brings his knights out to b6 and c6. He's going to play bishop d7 and castle. But
okay.
White could play g4 at some moment as well. That h8 rook is loose.
Yeah, I mean, white has to play g4 because once black plays bishop d7 and castle queenside, black's king is rather safe. And I have to say, I stand corrected. I think I was a little bit over-optimistic here. Now that I see how Chigaev is unfurling his pieces, I think Bortnick has to try to step on the gas pedal on the king side. Otherwise, let's not forget, he did sacrifice a pawn, and black has clung onto that pawn. And Chigaev can play on the queen side too. A well-timed queen b4, perhaps even the rush of the a-pawn, could cause some pain to white, and he's now down 30 seconds on the clock.
Something has gone wrong for Bortnick here. You'd much prefer to have your knight on g5 and your queen on f4. So that way you're putting pressure on the f7 pawn, you're preemptively stopping black from castling queenside, but he plays bishop b5, and you see the evaluation bar. It's taken a nosedive, and black should be very happy. Simple chess, bishop d7, castle queenside, done. Where is the compensation?
I'm looking for it. I'm looking at the queen side. I'm looking at the king side. I have 2 ideas in mind. The first is g4. This has to be calculated. I think Sasha's going to spend some time trying to figure out if you want to provoke the move h5, h4. Because black's pawn could be supported by g5. That could make things even worse. I was going to say, the second idea, knight back to d3. Create pressure on f7, perhaps get the knight over to c5. But Robert, that knight on c5 is very unstable. It can be easily smoked out with knight d7.
Yeah, doesn't look like all that much for white here. Maybe you can play rook h4, other rook to h1, then play pawn to g4, just to make sure that black's not have problems on the h-line. But he plays b3 instead, keeping the knight out of c4, allowing the black queen, as you were about to highlight, to go to square a3. But is that a real attack, and is black distracting himself from where the action is supposed to take part on the king side?
No and yes. I think the queen should stick to e7 for the time being. You should be looking for knight c4 check. I was going to point this out earlier. Now, knight c4, white's king can drop back to a1. You don't have to take that knight. So if I'm Maxime, I'm crossing my t's and dotting my i's. I'm making the move rook f8. I was going to say, make the move a5 to grab a little bit of space, and now knight c4 is a lot more serious of an idea. But the bigger problem for black is that even if you get the queen to a3 and the knight on c4, you are not threatening checkmate on b2. That square is protected by white's knight. So maybe you play on the king side with rook f8 and perhaps even prepare f7, f6.
Yeah, knight c4 check. I mean, it opens up the black king, but white king, excuse me, but also opens up the diagonal for that bishop on c6, staring through it, the d5 pawn to the queen on f3, and the rook on h1 in the corner. So knight c4 is going to hit Bortnick if he's not looking out for it. But I like what you said. Black should not have tunnel vision. King b1, just step the king back. Don't just think you're going to checkmate the white king. Queen a3 doesn't threaten anything.
And we've seen this kind of stuff backfire so many times. After queen a3, white could already consider snapping up the pawn on f6. And so I like it. Chigaev drops back to b6, reset. Don't take the draw because black is not risking at all. You can make as many moves as you want. There's no hurry. Bortnick can continue trying to improve his own position. And if black falls asleep, Robert, you could conceivably imagine white pushing b4, opening up the queen side. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Chigaev is the one who's in charge on the queen side. And he's preparing c5.
And that move, rook e1, that was played by Bortnick, it was a waste of time. He should have started with a move like rook h2, rook h1, pawn to g4, open up the king side. But the rook on h8 is about to slide away, and g4 would be a pawn sacrifice for activity. Not quite worth it here, so I like f3, then g4.
And if black plays c5 at the wrong moment, such as now, white could still play knight b5. Doesn't come with the same effect as it did when black's king was in the center, but still, a white knight on d6 could cause a lot of problems here for black, and that is why Chigaev puts his bishop on a6 to contest the b5 square. But it's a time scramble, Robert, and we know who the more experienced player is in the time scramble.
It's definitely Bortnick, and he may be down a pawn, but his position's also easier to play. Look at black's pieces. They're all stuck on the first two ranks with the exception of the bishop on a6, and white is going to put a rook on h7 as you're indicating the f7 pawn is tender, and he strikes with c5. The engine does not bat a... I don't even know what you call it because it doesn't have eyes. But that move c5 is recommended by the engine. I think it's a great choice.
Fantastic choice. He wants to play c takes d4 and shatter white's pawn chain in the center. And Bortnick trying to use his assets, sticking the knight on b5 and offering a trade. And if Chigaev accepts that trade, that pawn on b5 will kind of be a bone in black's throat. I still would give the edge here to Sasha Bortnick, despite what the eval bar is saying. Trust me, this is a hard position to play for black. And look at Chigaev's clock. He's now down to 15 seconds.
He's got to find a move. He does get 2 seconds added per move. That's the good thing about this time control. But now he's down to just about 12 seconds. And then knight can reroute b2 to a4 at some moment. And he plays knight c5 to trade off those knights.
And Sasha's going to go rook h7 here. He's going to keep the tension. So many tactics here. b4 trying to get the knight around to c6. And we're going to get a liquidation here. But who benefits? It's probably black.
Okay, you swap queens, take on d3. b4 is hanging. There's rook b2 at the end. So you do pick up the b4 pawn, Danya. There's not going to be extra material for black.
No, but white's got a lot of weak pawns here. Black's rook coming to c5. White has to engineer counterplay, perhaps against the f7 pawn. That is black's only target, but you might not be in time because rook c5 is coming really fast.
And he plays king b2. He knows that he's going to lose a pawn. Oh, rook a1. That's dangerous.
Careful now. Rook a6 could end up in checkmate. King c5, d4 is mate.
Oh, what's he doing now? Rook h3, rook a6 check, and the other rook comes to a4. This is dangerous for the black king.
It most certainly is. Black could get checkmated. White could get checkmated. Chigaev is down to 8 seconds. He sent white's king where it wanted to go anyway. Oh. King c5?
Does he have that move? There's also b6 there. That looks very scary for black to play. He plays it.
d4, rook takes d4. That's why he put the rook on d2. King c3, there's rook takes d3. Great tactics by Chigaev on his last seconds.
So b6 by Bortnick looks more or less forced. He goes, oh, he blunders it.
Oh, he blundered it.
But what's this, Danya? I mean, rook a7 at some point goes after f7. I feel like white has a chance to survive, but he barely gets his move off.
You have to take on f7, go to f6, try to eliminate the linchpin, the e6 pawn. Again, he barely gets his move off.
Yeah, but we know how good he is at both. Rook f6, he'll take e6, and black has split pawns. And just like in bowling, that's not a good thing in this rook endgame. The e-pawn is passed as well, so I think black has still chances to win this game if white goes wrong, but white has this passer of his own.
Sasha is an amazing endgame player. He's going to try to give away the e-pawn for the g-pawn, and I think he's going to make that happen. But where do you go? g5. I wouldn't have done that. Now e7, but the king is cut off.
Yeah, he cut off his own king. The king needed to be on d2, but he brings the king active. But now the d-pawn, how are you going to stop that one?
You're going to deliver the lateral checks, and that was wrong because the king curls around to e7. He's going to lose both of his pawns now.
Yes, and the d-pawn can push. The rook can go to d5 behind it.
Just take it.
Oh, no.
Rook takes e6.
Throw in the check and then take e6. You're up 2 pawns. This is clean.
Incredible technique by Chigaev. I am impressed. He had no time to figure any of that out. He still needs to deliver a couple of finishing touches, though. I have seen crazier things than this happen, but this would probably be winning, Robert, even without the g-pawn. This is completely winning at this point.
Right, the king has to stop the g-pawn. The rook is desperately attempting to stop the d-pawn. But no, this is not going to happen as the g-pawn rumbles forward and the white king is paralyzed. The The white rook gives one check. Not
Oh,
helping.
Mr. Bortnick taking a page out of the Naroditsky school, but unfortunately it fails. And Chigaev strikes first.
He does indeed. That rook e8 move was a cheeky attempt, hoping that Chigaev was pre-moving something else and would give up a rook. Instead, he hands Chigaev that game. It was well earned by Maxime. He is up 1-0. Dana, do you have any other matches underway that we want to tune into?
Well, there are plenty. I want to look at Yale Sokolovsky. Let's reward him for his incredible performance in the first round. But he unfortunately lost his first game to Sargsyan, who won his first match by forfeit. So he's coming in fresh. On the other hand, Sokolovsky is coming in a little bit more warmed up. Can he strike back in the second game with the white pieces?
So what's going on here? Not a single pawn has been traded, but black has taken a bishop, a dark square bishop, for a knight. And there's tension on b4 to c3 and c5 to d4. Black could push that g pawn at some point to kick the knight out of f3. And it's
Such as now.
Yeah, that was a big mistake.
Well, a great call by you. You literally called that even before c takes b4 happened.
Oh, no, but this is just a collapse for white. You lose d4, then b2 is loose. The b4 pawn can be recaptured. This looks clean for black.
Sean Sargsyan fresh off an incredible performance in the late title Tuesday. I think he came in third, but he tied for first. He is an amazing blitz player. He's got 2 minutes and 51 seconds on his clock and a dominating position to boot. He's got a 1-point lead in the match. This is looking real bad for the Israeli talent.
Yeah, he's just planting his pieces on dark squares. You would only be able to kick out that knight with a pawn going up to f4, but that loosens your position. Your king will be very weak. So knight c4 played, but more trades. And oh no, down to the open bishops. They're going to devastate white.
The wheels are coming off here. The knight on h4, the knight on c4. Discombobulated. Black is dominating in the center. White's pawn majority on the queen side, a so-called majority, is going absolutely nowhere. It's all prevented by this one pawn on a6. And things are going from bad to worse, Robert. Knight back to d2, apparently another mistake. Is it because of queen g5? Well, that's probably a reasonable move.
Can't complain about black's decision-making in this one. The only bit of good news, I would say, for white is his position isn't collapsing just yet. The knight on h4 is stabilizing white's position. There are no attacks that I can see just yet, but in the long term, the bishops are too strong. And you see Sargsyan, his eyes are wide because he has so many... Oh, no.
Oh, no.
No, you can't open the position up for the bishops.
I mean, I see what he's trying to do. He's trying to double rooks on the f-file and engineer some counterplay against the f7 pawn, but where's that counterplay going to come from? He's got no activity. He's got no targets. f7 is perfectly defended by black's rook.
Yeah, I mean, queen e7 now. Oh, he takes.
Ooh.
That was surprising to me.
It was surprising to me, too. I think he's just going after white's pawns on the queen side, which are completely unattended. And rook b3, I would not even... You'd get kicked out of a Soviet chess game for playing that move. You got to sack those pawns and go all in on the king side. But how? Maybe rook f4. I would consider rook f4. But it's all bush league.
Yeah, g3 is hanging there. It feels like you're just going to give away all your material. And white's position was difficult. He knew it from early on when he allowed g4. But now it just seems one-sided as it gets. And also a minute plus on the clock for black.
No, Sean, he plays incredibly fast, and that's one of the things which makes him so difficult to play. Even in an increment time control, when your opponent is blitzing out moves, your first thought is, man, there's no way he's playing this quickly without blundering. Then you look at the board and you see that they're not blundering, and this makes you frustrated, it makes you mad, and f4 was a great example of the kind of impulsive move that you tend to make when you get annoyed that your opponent is playing fast and accurately. As one streamer likes to say when he's tilted, he sees everything.
I know who that streamer is. He's a great one. And the rook comes to f1. They have to watch out for the f7 square. That's the only possible target in black's position. But the queen trade is offered saying, what was that about a target? There's nothing you can do. The knight on h4, even if it gallops back to f3, there's no outpost. There's no stable square. There's nothing for it to attack. It's on the rim, and it's looking particularly dim.
And the game is decided by the combined forces of the protected passers, coupled with the horrendous weakness of all of white's queenside pawns. Look at the way that Sargsyan defends while attacking. He drops the queen back to b7, using the queen trade in order to gain a tempo, because a queen trade is tantamount to harakiri. And speaking of harakiri, he gives away the pride of his position. I didn't like that move. I thought that was totally unnecessary by Sargsyan.
That move didn't make sense, because if queen takes b4, White steals the a6 pawn, exactly. And that's in a very important pawn that gives White a passer. So I think that he was hasty. And a childhood coach of mine always said haste makes waste. And I'm not even talking about chess coach, this was in sports. And this position was just, that was a hasty decision. Shant has 2 minutes and 5 seconds remaining. Why did he have to be so quick?
Well, he pulled a Nepo, right? You get into that zone where you think every one of your moves is invincible until it's not, until you make the blunder. The good news for Shant is that he's still up a minute and a half. White has this permanent weakness of his king. There's all sorts of tactics related to a check like bishop d4 at the right moment. If Shant can win the a pawn, I think he's going to win the game. But it ain't going to be easy as he offers a queen trade. Very devious move, Robert, because if White trades, he's not going to be able to hold that pawn. And so Yali, he declines.
And it just showcases the dominance of that bishop on g7. You would like to play rook a1, get a rook behind the passed pawn. You're not getting there. There's a bishop on g7 staring all the way through. So queen c7 attacks the f7 pawn. For black, do you just put your queen back to b7? That allows rook takes f7. I'm hanging the pawn on the spot.
I think you got to go rook f8. Uh-oh. Rook f7, rook b1.
Yeah, he's tricking him.
But here comes the a pawn. It's a 3-result game, Robert.
Yeah, I still feel like White can just push forward without risk. The king is not under attack for White. That a pawn is very close to promotion. So he goes back to f3. He wants a7 in the near future. How does black even stop this pawn?
By the way, White just declined a repetition. He can go back to b7, and that would once again repeat the position. I think he should. With 10 seconds left, I don't think Sokolovsky should go for it. Will Shant go for it now? Rook b8 leads to, I think, a 3-time repetition. He's up a point in the match, but it would be very frustrating to give this game away. And he's going to keep trying. Oh, my lands, girl. This is risky, man.
Yeah, his king is no saver. Knight f5 looks nasty. There might be rook takes a6 there. Yep. So Sokolovsky down to just seconds. He plays knight f5. What's wrong with rook a6?
Well, I think White just takes on g7 and essentially uses the long-term weakness of black's king to generate drawing counterplay. It's not winning for White, but I think it's a draw. Maybe bishop f8. Knowing Shant, he's probably going to try to find a way to get his bishop on the board.
Bishop f8 would be a ridiculous move, but I don't see why it doesn't work. He instead trades, and that rook is coming up to f4. So the black king isn't completely out of danger yet. You need to make a couple more stabilizing moves. Trade queens would be a good deal for black. And goes rook f6, and queen h5 is coming.
Look at how safe this king on h2 is. That king is sipping in its pina colada, lying on the beach, and letting the heavy pieces do the heavy lifting. And suddenly, black is the one who has to be very careful. Other than the threats against the king, Robert, you have to be very careful not to get forked, right? Queen e4 check. It'd be really, really nasty if the rook ends up at the wrong place at the wrong time.
And that could happen. Like if you play rook a7 trying to defend, there could be queen d4 coming. And where's the king going right now?
g8.
Okay.
Where is White going to go? Rook f4 maybe? Try to reroute to g4?
That's what I'm thinking. Maybe black's best bet is to play e5, so the rook can swing over in the defense.
Indeed. Of course, now e5, not possible just yet. But in the event of rook f4, e5 and rook g6 is an excellent defensive approach.
But where's the king going? Because you're up to h7, g4, g5. That happens fast. Oh, he just wants to draw now.
There was also queen h5, by the way, but I guess it could have been met with rook a7 hanging by a thread. I think we're going to see a repetition of moves here. Or are we?
Queen f4? So if the king moves, what's the deal? Don't we just repeat again?
Oh!
Whoa.
We do. Rook queen b8 is a threat.
E5!
Oh, he blundered! Oh no, what a tactic! And you called it!
That's heartbreaking.
Is it over? Is it over? I guess it is. There's no fortress here.
That's huge. If you could put your pawn on g3 and bring your rook back towards the king, you may be able to survive this. But all right, this is a good attempt for White, all things considered, but it is winning for black. He hung his rook, did Sokolovsky, and he may have some outside chances to survive this.
Shant is a devil. How did he see that so quickly? That did not occur to me at all. He's not going to survive it. He's going to have to give away one of his pawns in order to stave off checkmate. And there it is. You could take it probably, although I would play f5 here.
Yes, but rook f3. So the problem for White is black can sort of force you to move at this position right here. If White had to move, the rook would leave, and you would lose the f4 pawn.
So rook f2, I would go queen e3,
and
or queen t1, and back to e1. You're exactly right.
Queen takes f3 wasn't quite winning. I mean, it's close.
But this wins because White is simply in zugzwang. You have to give away the f-pawn. There's no stalemate. you've got too many pawn moves, it's over.
And
now you're going to give away the queen.
Exactly that. The queen could take the rook, you would win. So he's going for a variation just like that, queen e2, and wait for the rook to sit back on f3, and then you take it.
That's what he's trying to do.
And is it, I mean, I feel like computers win this very easily, but for humans, it's hard to track down the rook.
Oh, it is. Like, rook a3, and good luck trying to figure out a fork with 10 seconds left. And it's easy, actually, to allow 3-time repetition by accident. I've seen that happen before.
Do you see Shant's eyes? He's looking at this position like, how do I win this?
And Yali is finding all of the right squares for his rook. He's not allowing black to forcibly give away the queen for the rook and force a winning pawn endgame. Maybe queen h4 should be tried.
Okay, he goes, so don't go
rook
rook
h3.
Yeah, rook h3 is the right square. This is not easy.
This might end in a draw. This is unbelievable. I've never seen this exact construction before, Robert. The rook has a3, f3, and h3. The king has g1, h1, and h2. There's too many waiting moves for black to induce Zugzwang.
Okay, king
Rook a3.
Oh my goodness. Wait,
Take it.
No, it's bad. It's bad. H4. The pawn's
Doesn't
too
work.
fast.
It's a draw. It's too fast, and black is unable to dominate white's queen at the end. There are some positions, Robert, where there is some sort of win in these types of positions, but not here. The queen is optimally placed for defensive purposes. Don't go to h4.
No. That would blunder your queen. And what amazing resilience from Sokolovsky, because that position, we chalked it up. You blunder a rook, you lose the game. He decides to give up his queen for a rook, and he held. That was amazing. It's not a fortress. We saw the eval bar saying black was winning, but practically speaking, with just 10 seconds, 15 seconds on your clock, winning that proved impossible.
It was an incredible save, but if you're shot, there's no reason to catastrophize and no reason to tilt. Hey, you allowed a draw. Okay, you're up a point. You're one win away from scoring your second win of OES, right? You got to reach 2.5 points. He's in a great spot, and Shant is not one to tilt all that easily, but still an amazing, amazing save by the international master from Israel.
That was some great defense. What's happening in our other matches down under? Are there any other games that are in session that we can tune into?
There's so many games in session. I don't know where to turn to. Santos Latasa is leading Aditya Mittal. I'm going to go to the Bortnick match here. Back to the Bortnick match against Maxim Chigaev to see if Sasha Bortnick can recover from that first round loss. He might lose a second one here. It's rook and bishop versus rook.
Oh, no. For everyone watching, this is a theoretically drawn position. Good luck to you with mere seconds on your clock surviving this. That is not a fun task. It's super difficult. And the good news for Bortnick is he has more time.
But he knows the right position. This is the mirror image position in which, and it's a draw. He's made it. I guess they were on the tail end of those 50 moves when we tuned in.
Yes, and this is the right defense, though. You keep your rook on a dark square, 2 squares away from a king on the 2nd or 7th rank, and that allows you, once the check happens, to offer a rook trade. A rook trade means that there's no winning chances. A lone bishop cannot deliver a checkmate.
And so the second game ends in a draw. It is a 1-point lead for Maxim Chigaev. He needs to reach 2.5, and so Bortnick with his back against the wall. We've got a couple of other games still going. We have Santos Latasa against Aditya Mittal, who forfeited his first game, and so the margin for error thins out. And an angry Santos Latasa. He won the second game. The first game was a draw. And he is 1 win away from leveling his score in the OES and scoring his first match victory. And it looks like he's well on his way, just visually.
Can you just take the pawn on b6 that's hanging over there? So I don't think it's just visual. It's material as well. Maybe black takes on c4, gets a passed pawn. But I feel like with the bishop and the queen snagging material on the queen side, looks really nice for white.
I would take on c4 here with black. I think your only chance is to create a counterweight in the form of a passed pawn. Watch out for rook takes f3 at the right moment. Right now, it's a shot into thin air because white just takes back. And Aditya with 45 seconds, Robert, I don't see this happening for him.
I wasn't even looking at the clock. The position looked bad enough, but when you're down over a minute on time, taking on c4 is the best decision. Oh, he goes back to e3. Why there?
I would have maybe gone rook e1 or taken b7, but okay, this is also solid because the e6 pawn is such a big weakness. I would follow up with rook e1. And I think the time might decide the game here.
I think it's what you were saying, by the way. The rook takes knight on f3 was scary to shatter white's kingside defenses. So that's why he brought the queen back to e3. Now that we're talking about it, I like the move even more. But if black gets a couple moves like b5 and knight d5, that passed c-pawn, it will be protected and dangerous.
And so white could consider playing b5 in order to sever the connection between black's pawns, but that comes with its own risks. And look at Aditya Mittal getting his knight to the best square. Santos, sloppy couple of moves, and suddenly the tables are beginning to turn here.
And sloppiness happens in blitz chess when you're down to a minute on the clock. Queen c5, it does go after the c4 pawn. I think black plays b5. He jettisons the b pawn, so the c pawn can be a passer. You take my pawn, please. I get c3, and it's not about pawn quantity. The quality would be in black's favor.
Now the Spanish Grandmaster is under a minute. The time situation beginning to equalize. Will Mittal find b7, b5 here, deflecting the queen? I think he might be tempted by rook c8, but then white might be able to get away with queen takes c4. Then I thought maybe knight e5 and take on f3. But even in there, white's bishop will prove very, very, very strong. He goes queen b8, delivering a check to the white king. What's his follow-up, though?
Rook takes f3 and queen f4. He is going on the offensive right now, and white needs to be very careful. He doesn't.
What an idea, but rook g1 at the end?
No, the queen takes f3, and then knight f4 is coming.
King h2, but king h2 there?
Oh, barely
c3.
Surviving.
Oh my gosh, he plays c3 first.
Brilliance from Aditya Mittal. Rook takes knight on f3 was just a shot that Jaime Santos Latasa did not see coming. And look at him. He's up in his chair because like, what's happening? I thought I was the one with the upper hand. Now white's king is in grave danger.
But black has to keep his foot on the gas pedal and keep an eye on the clock. He goes rook f8. And now f2 is hanging, but perhaps white wants to give that pawn away. No, he doesn't. He defends it with rook g2. How does Mittal continue the initiative as he brings his knight into the center, chiseling his way at white's king side? And bishop h6 here, Robert, might be one attempt to turn the tables.
But bishop h6, the knight can slide back to g6, just shutting down the g-file. I think is necessary. You got to shut down the white's counterplay and then bring the knight up to h4.
Great call. Knight g6 shuts down all of the play, but with 8 seconds, he doesn't see it. He blunders mate it too.
Oh my gosh, his rook is hanging with checkmate, and Jaime Santos Latasa makes it through. He steals that game from the jaws of defeat, and he wins. He is now at 1 match win to couple with his loss in the opening round.
He did all of the hard work, Robert, did Aditya Mittal. He sacked the exchange. He brought his pieces in, and at the last moment, all he had to do was intercept the rook on the g-file, and he would have been well on his way to tying the match. That is blitz chess, ladies and gentlemen. This is why we watch. Speaking of watching, I'm going to flip us on over to Amin Bassem against Samveltar Sahakyan, 2 players who won their first round matchups. They drew their first 2 games, and this is a crucial game. It's not decisive. The winner of this game will have 2 points and will need half a point more in order to win their second consecutive match.
And this is such a super grandmaster type of game. And Bassem Amin, he's been over 2,700. He was the first player from the African continent to reach 2,700. He's up a pawn. Let's count. White has 5, black has 4. But black has the pair of bishops and an open board. That is providing compensation, which is usually a vague term. And even to my eyes, Danya, it's not exactly clear at what point black is going to be worse because white will start pushing some pawns.
Black is definitely not worse. He is in some trouble on the clock, though, and this is what worries me about both of these players. They're a little bit less experienced in these time scrambles. How does Samveltar Sahakyan keep the pressure up? I would consider a move like rook c3. Just throw your pieces onto white's side of the board and hope for the best as he lifts his king up to g7. And Amin Bassem trying to trade off as many pieces as possible, forcing a pair of bishops off the board.
I think it's a great decision from white there to trade the light square bishops. That way you can control the light square color complex. The dark square bishop cannot compete. As you put on rook f3 followed by f5 at some moment. White is up a healthy pawn.
And I would throw f5 in. Strike while the iron is hot.
He plays king g2 comp. Just knight e3 is available as well. Let's hop that pony forward.
And rook c3 would run into knight f5 check. So easy to miss tactics related to the knight when you've got 8 seconds on the clock. Maybe I'll jinx him. No, rook to c1. Good move.
And he can go after the queen side pawns. Rook a1 at some point. The rooks can line up on the first rank and go after the white king if you're not careful. Rook d7. Your arrow there suggests that the king may be in trouble on g7.
It's a dog-eat-dog world. Both pairs of rooks going after each other's king. And this works out tactically because rook takes c3. There was rook takes c1. So a pair of rooks is off the board, but black is still very active.
Oh, did not like knight f2. Knight f2 is a very... you put yourself in a bind, and now we'll see... this is really close at this point.
Suddenly, white is on the defensive, although I think the game is likely to end in a draw. White has to avoid losing this pawn maybe get a6 in return for b4.
Yeah, but I think white is going to lose a pawn in this variation. There's going to be a rook e3 at the right moment. Rook c4 now. Take on h4, then take back on b4.
But h5.
Ah, you clever, clever guy.
Rook takes a6, e6, and I think we're going to see a liquidation. Technically, black is going to be the first to the party on the queen side, but it's a dead draw because white's king is close enough to keep the pawn restrained. Another draw. Robert, we're going to have a 1.5 match here. The final game is going to be decisive. Let's stay on this match.
And Sahakyan, we saw him take down Alexei Sarana when he was losing 2-0. He won 2 to force Armageddon. He won that Armageddon game. And here with the black pieces, he's on the better side of a draw. It's just going to be down to bare kings after the rooks trade on b5. And we see this liquidation. We see the half point for each side. 1F. And Bassem Amin, he looks mad about that one.
Yeah, and perhaps even earlier in the game, he seemed to be better, but great active defense by the Armenian Grandmaster. A couple of updates, Robert, as this decisive game gets underway. Jaime Santos Latasa, we saw him defeat Aditya Mittal. Alexei Sarana, a mad Alexei Sarana, runs over Pranesh, and he levels his score. Alexander Bortnick against Maxim Chigaev is on the ropes. Let's quickly switch to that game because it's in its concluding stages, and then we'll go back to the Bassem Amin match. Can Bortnick level the score with one of his vintage attacks, Rook H6?
Oh, Rook H6 is so nasty, and he finds it. You know him very well with Knight
don't
F6
take
check.
H7. What a devilish move by Chigaev.
Oh, gosh. Knight F... Rook F1. What precision. Stopping that one tactical idea that black had. Now Knight F6, Queen takes H6, Queen H7 is force mate.
Am I allowed to say sexy? I just did, so I don't care because it was.
That was actually some brilliant tactical awareness from Bortnick.
Incredible. The score is 1.5. Robert, where do we go? We've got Amin Bassem. We've got this match. I'll give you the final say. Where do we start?
Well, the other game should have started first, so let's go to the Sahakyan match against Bassem, just because they finished first. That means they started first, and we already have some clarity in the position. Only one pawn has been traded, but look at that knight on c6. Look at the white pawn on c3. It does dominate that knight somewhat, and I tend to like these positions from the white side. A very solid approach from Samvel.
As a King's Indian player, a life pro tip, the Torre attack, which is what happened in this game. Kind of a London system, but with the bishop going out to g5 rather than f4. One of the most annoying setups that you can play against any King's Indian player. I mean, Bassem is a lifelong King's Indian player, so let's see how he handles this very interesting structure. Oftentimes, Robert, you see black's knight swinging over to f4, and that's why you often see white's rook from f1 going to d1 or e1 so that you vacate the f1 square for the light squared bishop.
Good idea. The a2 pawn, also a bit tender. The bishop on e6 staring in that direction. So rook f to d1 is the accurate play, and a6. So black may expand with b5, but that would also entice white to play a4 to challenge black's structure on the queen side. These little pawn moves down there, they have huge consequences.
And you have to weigh the pros and cons very carefully. a4 weakens the b3 square, but of course that is the power, the defensive power of this knight on d2, which controls that square and can hop into c4 the moment the black's knight withdraws back to its sort of initial developmental square. Of course, that would also blunder the pawn, so it's not possible for now. Will Amin continue his expansion with b5, which white has just allowed?
It's such a big question here. I would not do it. I feel like it gives white some points to go after. So I feel like I would show some restraint, and that's exactly what he does. With rook c8, queen to b1, they're jockeying for position.
If we had to explain to a Martian, Robert, what Grandmaster play was, I would give these last couple of moves. Rook c8, queen b1, a very slow, maneuver and play.
yeah, no, that's exactly what it is. They're making little incremental progress. And for black, do you play b5, or is that going to be meant by a4? Now that the queen's on b1, can you take on a4? Whereas you wouldn't have done that with the queen on c2. We could see that. It sounds like a joke, but we very well could see some kind of just maneuvering game here. But I feel like black, I don't know if you have all the time in the world, because b4 has become a threat for white.
It has, and that is why queen b8 comes to mind. But Amin is burning tons of clock here, trying to figure out the proper arrangement of his pieces. You called it, Robert. This position is easier to play for white. White's more compact. White's more solid. Black has more weaknesses to watch over. Will we see a4 or will we see b4? Big decision right now for the Armenian GM.
Well, I think if a4, black will just take that immediately. And the queen was on c2, could have captured back. Now that it's on b1, after a4, black would have captured. So b4, it said, I think you have to swap if you are black, and then put your knight on c4. He brings that back to b7. Apparently, that was a big mistake. c4.
Or is it a4? I mean, one of those moves really puts black under tremendous strain.
Whoa, he goes knight b3 instead. And I understand why, because there's so much tension in the position. That move was a big inaccuracy. That was a mistake that went from a much better position to perhaps a slightly worse one. Down to the c3 pawn, bishop on g7, or just the c3 square in general, it could be black's to occupy.
Black has to figure out suitable arrangements for this knight, but don't go knight d6. That walks right into e5 with a fork. Perhaps you want to discharge more of the tension in the center with rook to d8. Instead, Amin Bassem infiltrates with the queen. Queen c2, offering a mass trade. And white has to be very careful. Suddenly, the position appears very, very flimsy.
Isn't white going to lose a pawn now? Because if you swap queens, the bishop on e2 and the pawn on a2 are both loose. The e4 pawn is undefended, as you mentioned. So isn't black just winning material?
Well, I think after queen c2, there might be rook d1 to d2. And then there are some tactics there where black can take the knight and deliver a check on the back rank and then take on e4. But at the end of the line, white infiltrates the 7th rank, and that is the last thing you want. I think Amin should play with an abundance of caution here. A draw in this game would mean Armageddon.
Yes, which is great for the fans and great for us, but I think for these players, they're really assessing it. We have the engine at our side, the left-hand side of the board. Outside there, you see the engine. They don't. They're assessing the position on the fly. And speaking of on the fly, Samvel turns Sahakyan down under a minute, and Bassem about to join him there.
Ooh. Okay, the queens are off the board. Once again, can't play knight d6 because of e5 as much as you would like to. And white has that c5 square, so I would not be convinced that black is in the driver's seat. Not at all.
No, I think that white does have some long-term chances here. The knight on b7 is a passive piece. It's just stopping the white knight on b3. It's restricting it, but it's not doing much of its own. So I feel like with Bassem dropping down under 40 seconds, it's clear he has difficult choices to make.
And he is trying to keep his foot on the gas pedal, attack the weaknesses on e4 and b4. Technically, this is a fork. I'm not even sure he's threatening knight takes e4. Actually, he might be. And maybe there is some devious defense, Robert, that involves trapping this rook like on b4, but I can't quite figure it out.
Looks just like good moves from black. And you look at Sahakyan, he's not figuring it out either. He's about to dip under 30 seconds. It's a lead on the clock for black and more active black pieces as well. Not an easy choice.
Intuitively, I would go knight c5 here, but I'm not even sure how that works. I'm going to let Samvel do the calculating. Knight e5 also comes to mind. Rook takes b4, knight c6. He's burning the rest of his clock to calculate this. This better be good.
Yes, and he's down to under 12. Now getting to 10. He has to find a move. He plays knight to d4. So if you take on b4, maybe white takes on e6 and shatters black's pawn structure. With e5 to follow, the g6 pawn will be loose. That bishop on b1 will see the light of day.
He does exactly that, but instead of e5, he swings his knight over to the center. And now he's got a cornucopia of threats. Knight c6 and takes e6. And the rook on b4 is in some trouble as well. I like white's position, but can Bassem Amin cause problems with white under 15 seconds?
And watch out for a3, followed by bishop a2. That bishop, and after rook c4, it's a mistake apparently. You're going to see a lot of question marks at this stage of the game. Yeah, it's a good decision.
Time scramble. Will black take on e4? Will black have the guts to take on e4 here? Oh my gosh, 10 seconds now for Bassem. Takes g7 and bishop d4. Was winning an exchange.
He brings his rook up. Can't blame him for that. We might see some minor pieces traded. The knights come off on c5. If rook takes e7, the knight isn't going to move to a4 to c3, but you're pointing out g6 is hanging.
And crucially, the c1 square is protected.
Yes. Because otherwise there would be some back rank issues for white, and the bishop on b1 will be loose. g5, good move down here. Is rook, I would say rook c7, he goes rook a7 instead. Bishop d4, huge chance for black.
Absolutely huge. He went the wrong direction. Rook a7 was totally pointless. He's not even attacking this pawn. And don't laugh, black might actually be in the driver's seat pretty soon. Samvel needs to start thinking about how to bail out. But careful.
Oh my goodness. Rook c6 played king up to g7 is available. They're moving a little bit too slowly. Oh, rook a4, go after a2.
Instead, he pushes his pawns. White has to create counterplay on the other side of the board. Don't go b4 because of bishop e6. Bishop e6, he blundered it.
Oh, and he's beside himself, but Samvel Sahakyan. I mean, this guy, when he needs to win games, that's all he does is get W's.
Ice water in his veins, Robert. It wasn't perfect, but he got the job done yet again. He is 2-0 in OES, and without further ado, we have another time scramble as Maxim Chigaev is in the driver's seat against Alexander Bortnick, but not any longer. We have a time scramble here as well. This match is tied, 1.5, 1.5.
And we might see a race because white is going to take b7, black takes h4. It looks like black's pass pawn is faster, Danya. I think Bortnick's in charge.
I'm getting deja vu here. This is like exactly Bassam Amin's game, but he blunders g6. Oh, and there might be some mating ideas with rook g1 and knight b3.
You have to be really careful in this position. You have to watch out for both sides. Rook a6 comes to mind, but h4. Black doesn't care about the quantity of pawns. He wants his passer to go, and as you said, knight b3, rook g1, rook a... Oh, it's so close.
Rook g1 self-pins the knight, so Bortnick probably should play knight back to e6. And this does look like it's fizzling out into a draw. But black has to be careful here. Rook h6, and white clinging to his material advantage. Robert, it's a 3-result game here.
But I feel like Bortnick wants to win this game. He's bringing his king up, and watch out for knight c5 to b3 at some moment.
White had bishop f2 picking off this pawn. Bishop e1 now allows rook g1.
Knight d4, it threatens checkmate.
1 second for Bortnick.
0.6 seconds when he made that move, and he has rook g1 winning a piece, but instead goes knight b3 check. He'll pick up g7, and then go rook d7 at the end, but white can protect the bishop with rook h2.
Worst comes to worst, white can take a4, although defending that would be difficult, but Bortnick forgot about bishop e1. Rook h5!
Rook h5!
Rook h5! Rook h5!
Oh, it was missed.
And now again, it's a 3-result game.
Yeah, we were looking at it.
Nerves.
Oh, there was a skewer. Oh, look, it's rook e8 check if rook takes e1. Brilliant play by Chigaev.
He finds that and misses the one-move skewer. Now white's got winning chances again as he pushes the knight out of c5. And with 0 seconds.
Oh my goodness, barely getting the moves off. Watch out for knight e6, that's a fork. So he gives another check. We might see a repetition, Danya.
He missed it!
Oh, no! Oh my goodness, he hung his rook.
And Bortnick won't even give him the a4 pawn. That's how stingy he is.
Oh, and
fist bump.
Yeah, jubilation from Bortnick. He is Bortnick strong, flexing those chest muscles. A backwards knight move, forking king and rook, wins him the game and wins him this second round match.
When Maxim Chigaev finds out he could have won the knight in one move, you do not want to be anywhere near his mouse or his laptop. Let me tell you that, Robert. What a performance by Sasha Bortnick. It wasn't easy, either of the matches, but he gets the job done on demand, and he's one match away from qualifying to the finals in Singapore.
That was huge first day for him. We have another game going, Rachmanov against Shimanov. So two players who know each other well. They're both from Russia. They've squared off a number of times. And right now, I'm looking at squares in this position, Danya. I like the d4 square for black, but I like that bishop on a2. You have to be careful. You could overlook some tactics in the f7 square.
Listen, Robert, I don't want to be too controversial here. I know we're commentating, but I'm going to hazard a guess that this match is going to be won by someone named Manov. And it might be Rachmanov who misses it.
Oh,
gotta see that. Oh, he has it again. He has it again.
Oh, both players are missing
E6.
the tactics. E6 looks really good for white.
Although black does have f6, so black's still in the game. But now you're going to reposition the rooks to the d file, and this still looks really miserable.
Yeah, rook f to d4. How is black surviving this? Looks just lost.
Their first 3 games also ended in a draw. So if it's a draw, and you get an Armageddon, Rachmanov has to see those tactics. That was on a golden platter. Oh, and there's like rook takes c7, rook d8, but it doesn't work.
And he has king f8, so that's why black is within the drawing squares. But I think that white just sits on the position. Black never wants to take the rook on d7, handing white over either a pass pawn or the 7th rank. And a4 play, apparently that was a mistake, but why?
Well, he's keeping the tension for now, but can white find a way to break through? Is Shimanov suddenly like playing for a win here? As crazy as it sounds, I think he is.
But how? Is there going to be a rook h8 at the right moment?
Maybe even a sack on e6. I wouldn't rule that out.
That would be bravery. And I know you were going to say before that in Alexander, that was your brave decision, that one of them is going to win. Someone named Alexander is going to win this match. But I like what Shimanov is doing. He has defended the e7 square with his bishop. And as you're pointing out, b5 and black starts to gain the upper hand.
And black is up a pawn. Black is about to be up 2 pawns. Black is about to have a passed a pawn and a passed f pawn, and chances down the c file. Rachmanov is losing control of this game. As he tries to find a defensive construction, he might lose another pawn here. A4.
Oh, A4 looks great. The rook is tied down on the bishop on D5. He can still play A4 and then A3. And black has blockaded that pawn on E6. And Danya, the H4 pawn is on a dark square. At some point, black may pick that one off as well.
Yeah, black has to decide what he wants to go after. I would start by entrenching that pawn on A3 because it's protected by a dark squared bishop. You don't have to worry about it anymore. Now you can go after the H pawn.
And featured chat asking, is this bullet or what? It has become bullet, and they only have one life because this is the fourth and final game of the match. So black can convert this, and it looks like A2. Oh, hit A2 followed by rook B3 check, and then rook A3. It looked like he was well on his way to victory, but Danya, still work left to be done.
Is bishop takes G6 possible? No. There were some tactics there. Take another pawn, and now it's completely winning for black. Just take H4. Shimonov, oh, beautiful. Bishop A3 ends it. Or rook A3.
Rook H1.
Or rook H1.
Nice. Skewer. And that is game. That is match. That is Alexander Shimonov taking this against his compatriot and his fellow Alexander. He wins. He gets that match victory. Huge for Shimonov.
Absolutely huge. The first 3 games ended in a draw. What clutch performances here in the second round. And by the way, as a quick update, Robert, Sargsyan, who allowed the draw in that second game, summarily executed Sokolovsky in the third game, so he won his second round matchup. And Yael Sokolovsky with his first strike, and nonetheless, a very, very impressive performance thus far.
And we see the top of the standings. There are 4 players who are 2 wins and 0 match losses. Bortnick is joined by Sahakyan, who went into a deep endgame against Bassem Amin. He got a bishop check to win the rook and win the game. Shimonov, we just witnessed him take down Rakhmanov. And Sargsyan takes down Sokolovsky, the international master from Israel. He won his first match. It was an upset. The second match did not go his way. And there were 4 more matches, Danya. We saw some big performances by some of the heavyweights. Sarana, he gets his revenge. Revenge is sweet. For Jaime Santos, he got a bit fortunate, but it's best to be lucky and good as he is. And for Nguyen, he bounces back from his first loss. Samadov shows up in this one, but Martinez, Jospim, Jose Martinez from Peru, he was nowhere to be found. So Amin Ohanyan gets a match point. He goes to 1-1. Whew, what an exciting first 2 rounds, Danya.
I just have to say, I love this time control. I love this concept. And personally, I play a lot of these players a lot, right, in regular Blitz, but not all of them. And it's just fun for me to discover these new talents and see how they've improved in Blitz. You've got players like Sokolovsky, like Amin Bassem, by the way, who showed some incredible skill in time scrambles. And I think that what we're seeing, Robert, in really the past 2 or 3 years is a general improvement of everyone's skill in Blitz, in time scrambles, in rapid tactics. But all these players are going to have to show their skill tomorrow as well, because nobody has qualified for Singapore just yet. And yet Sasha Bortnick is oh so close.
Yes, you need 3 match victories to punch that ticket through to Singapore. And as you said, Sasha Bortnick, one of 4 players who is at a perfect 2 match victories with no losses. So as we look at the standings, Bortnick is joined by Shimonov and 2 Armenian players, Shant Sargsyan and Samvel Sahakyan. Danya, as you look at the first half of the standings, who are you most impressed by and who are you most surprised by?
Well, Alexander Shimonov is a consistently underrated Blitz player. He's been over 3,100 on Chess.com. He's gotten a lot better in the last year or so. He grinds Title Tuesdays, and he's gotten really, really good. So I'm excited to see Sasha Shimonov try to win a 3rd match tomorrow to make his way to Singapore. But some of those players, Robert, in the 1-1 swamp, Alexei Sarana, who loses his first round in shocking fashion to Samvel, how is he going to continue his rebound with a lot less margin for error? And Maxim Chigaev, a devastating loss against Bortnick, how is he going to display his resilience in his subsequent matches? A lot of X factors, a lot of uncertainties, Robert, and that is exactly why we watch. If it was certain, it wouldn't be fun.
Oh, that's definitely the case. And Chigaev, he is going to be kicking himself tonight after blundering that rook against Bortnick. But in the second half of the standings here, we see 4 players with 1 match win and 1 match loss, and then 4 who have lost 2 matches. They have not scored a match victory, which means 1 more loss tomorrow, and they have to say goodbye to their chances to Singapore. So, Danya, I'm going to have to ask you here, of the players with the second half of the standings, who do you think has the best chance of getting those 3-match victories and making it to Singapore?
Unequivocally, with full due respect to Aditya Mittal, of course, and Riyad Samata, both of them are very strong. It's Pranesh. Now, Pranesh had an off day, and I was getting concerned for him. I was watching his match this morning against Hikaru Nakamura. He was really off. He was blundering tactics. Uncharacteristically, he's usually over 3K on Chess.com. I am expecting Pranesh to get a good night's sleep, get his coffee, whatever he drinks in the morning, come tomorrow, clean slate, and I'm expecting to see a comeback from Pranesh. So of all the players who are struggling, I think Pranesh still has a chance. He can't get discouraged, but he needs to be perfect.
Some players will need to be perfect. Others have a little bit more wiggle room, but tomorrow's matches are going to be no less exciting than the ones we saw today. We already know that 4 players have a perfect match score. Bortnick takes on Sahakyan. Shamanov takes on Chigaev, even though Chigaev just lost his match. So the pairings, I guess, they're going to be a bit wonky, Danya, but it's going to be fun indeed.
It is indeed, and they're going to be wonky just because there aren't all that many players, so it's pretty standard for players at different points in the tournament standings to play each other. Sarana, Ohanian, that's going to be a fun match. It's going to be an uphill battle for the Armenian youngster who gets a walkover victory in the second round, and so also will have to get a good night's rest and will have to show his A++ game against a resurgent Alexei Sarana, who is already on his way to scoring a comeback after that first round loss.
Yeah, I think in addition to Alexander Bortnick, Alexei Sarana would have been the favorite coming into today's action. He lost in the first round. It was shocking, but that's what happens in these fields. They're so tightly contested. Samvel Sahakyan, an absolute monster in his own right. But we saw the top 4 matches, at least according to the standings. There are going to be 4 more matches as well. So Danya, Sarana, he is a favorite in most of his matches. Do you think he has what it takes to bounce back after today's opening debacle?
I think he does. And I think it's important to realize at this point, these players, they're all so experienced. They don't get too high with the highs. They don't get too low with the lows. They're not thinking of this as a disaster. They're not catastrophizing. And Alexei Sarana, he was tilted. He was angry. He banged his computer. And that display of emotion, Robert, I think a lot of people confuse that with tilt. That display of emotion is normal. It's healthy. You got to let it out. You got to signal to yourself that was unacceptable, and that isn't going to happen again this tournament. And I think once that happened, Alexei came back 3-0 in the second round, and I'm expecting his A game to come out tomorrow as well.
And many of these players will need their A game. This is the Olympic Esports Series. This is the preliminary stage. 8 spots on the line for the Singapore Finals, June 22nd to 26th. So this is the inaugural edition of the Olympic Esports Series. Chess is one of 9 esports selected. It's an honor. It's a privilege. All the players are giving it their all. So we thank all of you for tuning in for day 1. We thank all the players for giving it their all. They'll be back tomorrow, and so will we. So join us then. Goodbye, everybody, and see you tomorrow for rounds 3 through 5.